Good evening, everyone, and happy holidays. Welcome to the December 13th, 2021 special meeting of the City of South Pasadena Mobility and Transportation Infrastructure Commission. I'd like to call this meeting to order. Let's start with the roll. Liana?
Chair Abelson,
Here.
Commissioner Dunlap, Commissioner Fisher,
Here.
Commissioner Hughes,
Here.
and Commissioner Liu.
Here.
And Councilmember Primmett mentioned that he would be running a few minutes late, so he should be here shortly. All right, why don't we move ahead with the Pledge of Allegiance? Vice Chair Fisher, would you please lead us?
Okay, everyone stand, face the flag. Put your right hand on your heart, ready to begin. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Vice Chair Fisher. Okay, looking at our agenda, first action item is approval of the minutes of our last meeting on November 16th. I'll note that the minutes that were distributed include comments already from Commissioner Hughes and myself. And then I believe Liana circulated the revised set with some comments from Vice Chair Fisher. I'll just note that the comments from Vice Chair Fisher were fine with me. I think there was a typo. There was a word that was meant to be retail, and I think it said retain.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So that was the only note I had. Yeah. Does anybody else have any comments on the draft minutes?
No comments.
With that, I would move approval of the minutes.
Okay, Commissioner Hughes moves approval. Anybody second?
I'll second.
Okay. Commissioner Liu seconds. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstaining? All right, so the minutes as revised are approved 4-0. Moving right along, action item 2, slow streets. Deputy Public Works Director Gerber, welcome.
Thank you, commissioners. Good evening. I'm going to keep my comments brief because we have a team of people waiting to present for you tonight over Zoom. So our Slow Streets program, as many of you are familiar, it is funded by a Cycle 3 Metro Open Streets grant that was repurposed from not being used several years ago. And those funds expire this year. The original intention for use of those funds was to implement a slow streets program in South Pasadena, which consisted of a traffic study, design and layout of several street sections, and we'll show you those tonight, and then possibly the purchase of program equipment to implement this, what is intended to be a temporary program. Unfortunately, the process to implement this program was started late, and so now we find ourselves in a position where we won't be able to finish the project as intended in the current timeline. So tonight we're asking the commission for a recommendation on several things, providing feedback on the Slow Streets program, and providing a recommendation to staff to present to City Council this week on the choice of program equipment to be purchased with the expiring Metro funds. Now, let me clarify on the recommendation here. We have on the staff report, provide feedback on the traffic study and the Slow Streets program. I want to emphasize that a traffic study has been conducted. And we have a draft. We have a draft traffic study for my terrace as part of this project. However, it is not our intention to implement the program on the streets of South Pasadena without fully evaluating the traffic impacts and without conducting the planned public outreach to the community. And so tonight, in the interest of our time and our priority, we're not going to review the traffic study to a full extent because we won't be we won't be implementing any sort of recommendations with our current plan. We just have a conceptual plan of what to do. The purpose of this evening's meeting is to try to make use of those funds in a low risk, high benefit way to purchase program equipment to be used in the future once we can establish another funding source to complete the Slow Streets program, complete the traffic study, and complete the actual design layout of the street. So this might be a little confusing for everybody. That's where we're trying to focus tonight. So, oh, I'm sorry.
Just a quick
Oh, yes,
question.
yes.
What is the limitation on the purchase with your purchase agreements or contracting? For example, if you were looking at hard items such as, water, devices, barriers, any kind of planters, would you be able then, does the delivery have to be within the calendar December 31 as long as an order was placed? Or could it be based on, obviously, inventories are, limited because of supply chain issues? But as long as an order was placed or reservation was placed with the manufacturer or a supplier prior to a December 31 date, would that be acceptable through purchasing in the city and the requirements of the grant?
That's a good question. Let me first preface that, and then I can answer your question. I'll preface it with there's a few unknowns that we're sort of working multiple parallel processes at the same time. The first big unknown, and it's a relatively known, but it's somewhat unknown, is how much money is remaining for us to utilize. We have several consultants working in tandem with us right now who are expending some of the program resources. We have our staff working. And so it's a little bit of a moving target at exactly what's left to start. Number two, it's our understanding, to answer your question more directly, it's our understanding that you have to submit the invoices to Metro for reimbursement. So it's our understanding that it's costs incurred as of December 31st, not necessarily purchased and delivered. As a matter of fact, many of these items are months behind in terms of their delivery schedule or their availability. And that's part of the process right now, is actually identifying which items could even be delivered to South Pasadena, let alone when. And so some of these items we're trying to clarify. We have a meeting with Metro in the morning to sort of run down that invoicing reimbursement procedure to make sure that we've dotted our I's and crossed our T's and how this would actually work once we take this recommendation from you and then move forward to a council discussion about appropriation on Wednesday. Of course. And so we do have a couple high-level key findings from the traffic study, including the staff report. However, like I said, we won't focus on those this evening. We're going to move into having our consultants do the presentation on the conceptual design and program equipment component of that. I will say that, let me just reiterate about our plan to reduce risk here by trying to purchase equipment and not necessarily move forward with the program without the public review that's planned. Okay. With that, we're going to have a quite extensive presentation going through the conceptual layouts with you. I'm going to pass this off onto our team. So tonight we have over Zoom, we have Alta Planning and Design, Sam Zneimer and Ashley Hare. From Active SGV, we have Russ Ruderman. And from Arroyo Group, we have Phil Burns and Lance Lowry. And if there's no more questions for me as staff, I'm going to pass it off. I'll say one more thing. Since they're presenting from Zoom, we want this to be a somewhat collaborative process as possible. So please feel free to ask questions as the staff are presenting. You don't necessarily have to wait, and they'll let you know if they're trying to get through a concept before maybe answering questions. To make that a smooth process, I'm going to stay up here at the podium. And if you have a question, you can raise your hand or you can just interrupt verbally. And then we'll try to get the attention of our speakers so that they can answer your questions.
Sounds good.
Great. Please go ahead, Sam.
Hello, everyone. Can everybody see my screen right now?
We can.
Yes.
Great. So as Ted alluded to, I'm with Alta Planning and Design, and we are the lead team on the Slow Streets program. We were brought on in November to start work on this project, which has a end at the end of this December. So we have had about 5 to 6 weeks to work on the project so far and are planning to work throughout the end of this year to try to get as much done as we can. So as Ted also said, I'm joined tonight by Ashley Hare, who's a senior associate engineer with Alta Planning and Design, and she'll be walking you through the concepts later in the presentation. Wes Ruderman from Active SGV will walk you through the outreach and engagement portion of this project. As you know, we weren't able to conduct a large outreach as part of the program that we brought on, but luckily Wes Ruderman, Active SGV, and Aurora Group were part of an early phase A outreach with the community, and Wes will go over that outreach to talk about what we heard from the community early in the process. And then last, we're going to close with the Aurora Group, Phil Burns and Lance Laurie, talking about urban design and placemaking, really focus on the parklets and the programming elements that come with the overall plan for Mission Street. So as we talk about the Slow Streets program, what is it? What is the South Pasadena Slow Streets program? Overall, it is us looking at 4 different corridors, 3 residential corridors and 1 commercial corridor. Each of them have their own unique characteristics and they have their own goals. So for the commercial corridor, Mission Street, we're looking at the segment between Orange Grove and Fair Oaks. As we all know, this is the core of South Pasadena. This is the heart of our business district on Mission Street, Route 66, and one of the places that we're looking at for economic recovery as we come out of this pandemic. So what did that mean from council? What did we mean? What did we hear while we were going through this? We wanted to improve experience on Mission Street. We want to make it placemaking, inviting, open to the public so that they can go there, spend money, make it a great experience for pedestrians, shoppers, and visitors into our city. So that is the real goal behind the Mission Street concept. And as we go through that, both the placemaking elements that Aurora Group will talk about and the concepts that Ashley will walk you through, we'll see how we try to go about that. Remember, this is still the earliest iteration we have of the Mission Street concept. This will still have to go through a very robust outreach process, revision process, and a much more publicly engaged process where we can really hear from stakeholders throughout it. We'll tell you how and why that can occur. Additionally, beyond the Mission Street corridor, there are 3 residential corridors that we are looking at as part of the Slow Street process. And these include Hermosa Street from Columbia to Grand Avenue from Columbia to Mission Street, and Oak Street from Fremont to Garfield. These corridors were selected by the MTech as the highest priority corridors to look at for how to slow down traffic and to open up more active transportation space for residents as we continue through this pandemic and as we try to increase active transportation throughout South Pasadena. So we'll walk you through not only what we heard about these corridors, the concepts that we've created for each one of them, but we'll also talk about how can they be improved, and Wes will go over how does the demonstration process work for these streets and what does that look like. You can see some imagery on the screen right now. It can take the form of signage, it can take the form of bike lanes, it can take the form of crosswalks and other treatments that really facilitate the use of active transportation and promote that throughout the city, slowing down traffic and allowing people to walk and bike throughout the community. So I'm going to turn this over to Wes Ruderman at Active SGV to talk about what we heard when we went through our early outreach process.
Hi, good evening, everyone. So this outreach was part of the phase 1 of the project, which was a pre-design and a conceptual phase that was conducted between July and September and early October. And the outreach consisted of a couple components. The first one was on the residential side. So the process involved door-to-door canvassing of the 4 corridors that staff requested and MTech weighed in on as being potential good candidates for slow streets. So a program survey was distributed door to door. Folks were also spoken with individually if they were home. And then residents who received the survey could either mail them in or conduct the survey online. And of the respondents, 81% stated that they were supportive of having a slow street designation for their street. You can advance the slide, please. On the Mission Street side, the process was a bit more robust based on how in-depth a potential demonstration would be. And there were a couple components. One was one-on-one meetings with Mission Street stakeholders. And some of the stakeholders, these were small meetings, usually just a couple folks. An example of some of the stakeholders we met with were the owners of the dinosaur farm, Camille de Pedrini, Ellen Screen Printing, Shelley Stevens, Adobe Design, Mission Antiques, Tomorrow, the Maya Salon, Jones Coffee, as well as some property owners. I know some of the folks we listed are both owners of the business and property owners, but also a couple of the bigger property owners along the corridor, including Pete Kutzer, Jason Mack, and Matt Ganji, who's representing the developer of the school district parking lot. Focus group was also conducted, and that was done with the Chamber of Commerce's Economic Development Committee. And then the last step on this front was a community tour. So it was a tour of stakeholders, about a dozen folks participated out to the city of Glendora, which had implemented a similar demonstration project in November of 2020, and that remained up for 5 months. So as part of that outreach, some of the key themes and requests we heard were just one was requests to improve the kind of ad hoc nature of the outdoor dining and other outdoor business and parklets. There was also a strong ask for creating a more consistent design east-west across the Mission District. So from Fair Oaks all the way to Orange Grove. Some number of stakeholders shared that they felt there were gaps between, it didn't feel like a cohesive business district. Also requests to maintain and add vehicle parking. So adding vehicle parking where some may have been lost due to the parklet introduction, or maintaining vehicle parking as part of a demonstration project. We heard a lot about vehicle speeds and trying to calm traffic, keep traffic moving, but at the same time at a slightly slower clip. And at the same time improving those pedestrian crossings, particularly the unsignalized ones. Those are the ones we heard the most. For example, on Mound and on Diamond, where folks have to cross the street and people are not always yielding when they're in the crosswalk. That can make it a bit dicey there. And one of the other things we heard quite a bit was adding greening and shade to the district, whether that be through large planters or also shading elements for the parklets for the many hot days we have. And you can advance the slide, Sam. And as part of that process, one of the things we shared was really the options and opportunities for the demonstration. The Metro program is really quite unique in allowing for a lot of flexibility in terms of what cities want to demonstrate or what they might like to try out. One of the only limitations is that it needs to be in the public right of way, so it couldn't be on a private parking lot. And so we shared a few examples of, for example, what the city of Glendora utilized, including reflective lane tape, which can be pulled off the street relatively easily, large crash rated planters that can be utilized for pedestrian plazas or to protect parklets or an active transportation facility, and delineators, which are often used for curb extensions or just to make planters and other items more visible. So in some of the sample options we gave and were also included in the survey were high visibility crosswalks. That ended up being the most popular option listed from the survey. Curb extensions, angled parking, dedicated bikeway and edge lines. And I'll turn it back to you, Sam.
Thank you so much, Wes. And now I'm going to turn it over to Ashley here. We'll walk you through the concepts, and we're going to start with, it's going to go from Oak Street to Grand and Hermosa, and then Mission Street. So I will turn this over to Ashley.
Thanks, Sam. So as Sam mentioned, Ashley Hare, Senior Engineering Associate with Alta Planning and Design. And I wanted to walk through the concepts, but first set the scene for the things that we considered in laying out these designs. And the first obviously was community input, as Wes just spoke to. We're also looking at best practices for design, not only for vehicular mobility, but for pedestrian and bicycle mobility as well. And then we had another, a set of design parameters that we were working within, including ADA requirements, the design speed and prevailing speeds of these streets, which may not be the same number. Lane widths, we want them to be as narrow as possible, but still within the realm of what the city considers acceptable. Bus transit and fire truck mobility, these are large vehicles that have special mobility needs, either like for buses when they're approaching the curb to serve a bus stop, or fire trucks that are en route to an emergency and may need to take smaller streets. That all affects our turn radii at corners. And then the turning movements and storage needs at intersections, which are part of the traffic study that Iteris did that Ted mentioned early on. So next slide. So what are we looking at here? We're going to walk through these concepts. The first will be Oak, and then we'll go through the Grand and Hermosa design, and then ending with the Mission Street design. So the concerns that we heard about Oak Street in particular had to do with speeds. And there's a number of schools and other community establishments along Oak. And so our concern was getting speeds down and also making the intersections where pedestrians are going to be more visible. And you can see here, this is Oak at Fremont. And when you look at the plan drawings, you'll see the first section on top, and then it wraps to the bottom row and continues on. And then we'll have another sheet after this where the bottom row picks up at the top of the next sheet. So what we've proposed here at Oak and Fremont are some painted curb extensions. These would be done with white tape or paint, and then the flexible delineator post along those to make them more visible and also, again, visually narrow the street. The yellow crosswalk is required as it's in a school zone. And we are matching the limits of red curb here in terms of where parking would be restricted. So it's no different than what is out there currently. We travel eastward, we cross Fair Oaks, and next slide. And we come to Marengo. And something you'll notice here is that there's not a lot of design in between the intersections. And that's due primarily to the types of materials that we're working with. We have tape or some kind of pavement paint and flex post, which we are focusing our efforts at the intersections because that's where those materials are going to be most useful. There are other things we could do along the length of these corridors, but we're concerned about stakeholder and residential feedback in terms of on-street parking and those kinds of things. So if there are other treatments desired along the length of these corridors, we're all ears and we're happy to entertain those, but some of them will require more engagement with the neighborhood and the community. So we come to Marengo, and you see the green stripes there that delineate the bike lanes as they cross through the intersection. We also are in a school zone here, so we have the high visibility yellow crosswalks. And then again, some painted curb extensions to narrow the crossing distance for children or other pedestrians who are in that space. This takes a 42-foot crossing down to 22 feet when you factor in those curb extensions. And again, here we are restricting parking on the approaches to the intersection, but this is for visibility and again, to narrow that visual space as drivers come up and down Oak Street. So next slide. At Milan Avenue, we are changing it up a little bit. Instead of painted curb extensions, we are putting in pedestrian refuges at the center. This again is shortening that crossing distance by providing a refuge at the center of the crosswalk. If this project is accepted by the neighborhood and it wants to move forward with something like maybe curb one day, this is the depth of a pedestrian refuge that would be needed for it to be, you know, a true refuge in terms of ADA requirements. Again, we have yellow crosswalks as we're in the school zone still, and then some parking restrictions on the approaches to the intersection to make sure that we have the width to do these tapers on the leading and departing approaches to Milan Avenue. On the bottom row here, you see Fletcher Avenue. We are not in a school zone at this location, so the crosswalks have gone back to white. But again, we've got a similar treatment here where we are providing a pedestrian refuge at the center of the crosswalk. And as there is no stop control at this location, besides on Fletcher, we have yield control markings on the approaches to this crosswalk. Next slide. At Camden Parkway, there's an existing painted crosswalk here on the west side or the east side of the intersection. So we've augmented that with some high visibility markings, some more painted curb extensions to, again, like I said before, shorten that crossing distance between those two locations, and then added crosswalks at Camden Parkway. Next slide. And lastly, at Garfield, Garfield marks the edge of South Pasadena jurisdiction. So we really only have the easternmost leg that we can affect some change here. So we've added in high visibility crosswalk markings and one painted curb extension on the south side of the street that matches the existing red curb and parking restrictions there. So I suppose if there are questions on Oak Street, let's take those now, and then we can move on to Grand and Hermosa if there's no questions.
Commissioner Fisher?
Yes, I have a couple questions. You want to slow down traffic on Oak Street. Do you have any information as to what the prevailing speeds are today?
We searched around and we're not able to locate any recent speed or traffic count data as part of this design process. That is something we ideally would like to have, and it may be something the city would want to undertake to get those numbers. It would be particularly helpful in terms of doing a before and after study to see if these interventions were effective in slowing down traffic speeds along Oak. I think the gist here has been that this is a neighborhood feeling, that it has that sort of straight shot kind of feel to it, and it's wider than you know, would naturally induce slower speeds.
Okay, I had one more question where you're striping a refuge island.
Mhm.
Yes, I can't read the name of that street.
The top one is Milan, the lower one is Fletcher.
Okay, that's always stop control, am I correct? Or is it
Correct.
stop control on Oak? So why would you want to stripe a refuge since the pedestrian has the right of way to get all the way across the street? I'm concerned that the school pedestrian might get confused and wait in the middle where that pedestrian would be exposed. So why the pedestrian refuge island at a stop controlled approach?
Well, the idea here was to change it up, right? If we're doing painted curb extensions everywhere, then the drivers kind of get used to that approach and the idea here was to put something a little bit more unexpected than just painted curb extensions. This certainly could go back to painted curb extensions if that were desired. Pedestrians are not required to stop there though. So
So it'd
if
really
there
be
were
a
some-
painted, it'd really be a painted median and not a pedestrian refuge area. Is that correct?
right, exactly. Well, it's just painted part of the crosswalk, but the idea is that it's 8 feet deep, which is 6 foot is the minimum for an ADA compliant refuge. And so later on, if it were desired to put in, say, raised medians here to create an actual refuge, then that could be done. So again, this is our first iteration of the concepts. And so if there's consensus that something else is desired here, we certainly are open to changing it up. But the idea here was to make some different designs so that, one, pedestrians have shorter crossing distances and drivers are not expecting the same thing as they come to each location.
Thank you.
Commissioner Hughes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. A couple questions. The curb extensions you want to do, are you concerned about that impacting the parking, particularly over towards the Fremont area where we have a lot of, concerns about congestion with parking, limited parking? We know that there was so much pushback when we did the extensions on Fair Oaks.
Mhm.
There, people want those gone, the bulb outs. So I'm concerned about that. The other is, again, losing the parking in that area when it's so congested. And we know we have the issues with drop off with schools and Holy Family and such. And then also to tag on to Commissioner Fisher's, we just recently put in the stop sign at Milan and Oak. So I'm wondering if, people are gonna say, why are you keep it, you just did something there. What are you doing now? As opposed to thinking about other areas of the city that might need attention.
So to your first question, the curb extensions that you're seeing here proposed match the existing red curb, which is a no parking zone as it is. So we're not restricting parking any more than it already is currently. And then as far as the intersection in question, again, we are trying to implement changes that we think would improve or would reduce the speeding incidents along the street. And because of the materials that we are working with, again, the tape and the flex post, we're fairly limited in what we can do. And most of that attention falls at the intersection. So again, this is stop controlled, four-way stop controlled, and we're not proposing to change the traffic control here. We are just trying to add some visual markings to narrow the street and encourage slower speeds. So.
Thank you.
Commissioner Liu?
Yes, just one question. At the intersection treatments where we do have proposed bulb outs, you mentioned earlier in the presentation that there is consideration for fire truck turning radiuses.
Mhm.
If we're doing flex posts and vertical elements like that, has that been factored in, like, for example, at Fremont and Oak? Or like let's say like a northbound right, things like that. I just don't want to see a situation where, painted median or painted bulb outs make sense and they're great, but if we have a flex post there that's going to get, scraped every time a larger vehicle, makes a northbound right, has that been considered, I guess, on the placement of those?
Yes, it has. We've run those turning templates for fire trucks, the type that we coordinated with the city, which I believe is the largest fire truck that the city has, as well as just regular vehicles. And the kind of controlling factor when it comes to turning templates for fire trucks or any other type of vehicle is typically the width of the receiving street. So here, a northbound right, I mean, it's a fire truck, so everyone's moved out of the way ideally, and it has the full area of the intersection to maneuver within. And so a northbound right here would have both of the northbound lanes, both the through lane and the left turn lane, to work from to navigate that, to make that northbound right onto the western leg of Oak.
Okay, thank you. That sounds
Sure.
great.
Ashley, I just have a couple of questions. The first, I think you already answered, but I just want to make sure. You alternate devices, curb extensions at one intersection and the pedestrian refuge at another. And I think you answered it. That was just simply to provide different, instead of just the same device at every intersection to which a driver could get used, we have different devices to draw the driver's attention to the fact that they need to slow down and watch out for pedestrians. Is that
Correct.
okay? So it wasn't
Yes.
anything particular about the nature of one intersection versus another as to why you chose.
No, it
extension
was
versus-
primarily just, driver expectation is a big factor in speeding. And if we can give them something that they're not expecting, then odds are that their speeds will come down.
Makes sense. The second is you talked about the fact that currently there's nothing in between the intersection. I was wondering if intersections, and I was wondering if you all considered edge striping for Oak Street in between intersections from, say, Fair Oaks to Garfield to visually narrow the street in between.
Right. That could be an option to like delineate the parking area. Like, is that what you're?
Yes.
Yes, that is certainly something that we could entertain. However, and you'll see this when we get to the grand design where we added in bike lanes, we have some concerns about the materials and if we're only going to be using tape on these designs or something that's somewhat less durable than, say epoxy or thermoplastic pavement markings, that oak is fairly long. It's, some larger portion of a mile or maybe more. That's given the nature of the materials that we're using and the goals of this project, that's a very long way to lay out a taped stripe on both sides of the street. So that's, and you'll see this on when we get to Hermosa as well. We know that edge striping is desired there, but we have some concerns about the aesthetics of that and the durability of it longer term when this is meant to potentially only be in place for a few months as a demonstration project.
Sure,
So,
that all certainly makes sense. And maybe one thing to consider is perhaps we pick one block or so
mhm,
to, since this is all pilot demonstrator anyway,
mhm.
maybe we pick a block that we think is particularly sensitive and think about edge stripe there.
Okay.
Just as an
Ah.
idea,
Yeah,
Um,
we certainly could look into that.
Yeah, for example, the block, and then this is my last question, and we can move on. That the last block, the block from Garfield to, is it Camden?
Mhm.
That might be a block that could benefit from edge stripe. I don't know, or maybe it's a different block, but I just know that there's a lot of activity in that block, and there are a lot of
Okay.
movements. So just something to think about as an option. And then the last question was, if you could we could take a quick look at Oak and Garfield. So I think you have a treatment at the southwest corner there in front of the YMCA, if I have it right.
Mhm.
And then is that crosswalk that's noted there does that exist?
It does. Currently, it's only two stripes, like the one on the opposite side of Garfield where it's just the outer stripes.
Okay.
The one that's there now currently does not have the high visibility transverse markings.
Okay. Did you think about I know I believe the eastern half of the intersection or some portion of the eastern half belongs to San Marino. But with regard to the western side, did you think of curb extension or anything for example, the northwest corner, either the Garfield side or the Oak Street side?
So yes,
Okay.
we looked at that. There is a bus stop on the south side of the street. And so that's a factor for a curb extension over there because we need to make it available for buses to pull across the intersection and access that bus stop. And that can impact the geometry on the north side of the street as well in terms of a curb extension. That one is a little bit more feasible, but the skew of this intersection makes it kind of tricky in terms of, we were talking before about, say, fire truck maneuverability. If we had a southbound fire truck on Garfield that needed to turn onto Oak to go west, that's going to be a pretty tricky maneuver for a fire truck coming around that skewed corner and not knocking over the flex post. So
Gotcha. Okay. Okay, great. Thank you. Those were all my questions. I appreciate the help.
sure, yeah, and thank you all for the commentary and suggestions. It's really helpful for us as well.
Sure. So if there are no other questions for this location, we can move on to the next.
Okay. So similar set of plans here. We're looking at Grand Avenue, and we're going to walk up Grand to Columbia, and then we'll branch off on Hermosa. So Grand Avenue is another one that's really tricky in terms of the treatments we can use, and there's a lack of intersections here with stop control like we had at Oak, where we could put in curb extensions or augment the existing crosswalks and that sort of thing. So what we thought here could be a good solution are to put in bike lanes that preserve the on-street parking as it currently is. And this, again, is something where we're going to really need to do some internal analysis and talk with the city more about the materials choice, because this is going to be a very long distance to put down pavement tape and make sure that it stays down for the duration of this project, which, it's a demonstration, but it could still be on the ground for 2 or 3 months, depending on how things pan out. So again, we're working north from Mission here in the center of the top row. And again, it wraps to the bottom and then continues north. So next slide. Same treatment as we move up. And again, there's not a lot of stop signs along Grand Avenue, which again limits the choices we have in terms of putting in crosswalks or other types of treatments. And we keep moving north, we get to Hermosa. Hermosa is a 4-way stop, and because the stop bars and the stop symbols on the Hermosa legs are in a good position for what we've drawn in here, those are not being replaced. We're not proposing to take them out. It would still be a 4-way stop. It's just that they don't necessarily need to be replaced as part of this project. And what we've done here is we've incorporated curb extensions, again, to visually narrow the street with the bike lanes. And I know there was some desire to see crosswalks put in at this location, but the way that this intersection is currently built, the only leg we could put in a crosswalk at would be across Hermosa on the east side of the street. And we can certainly do that, but I wanted to talk through why we can't do anything on the other 3 legs. You may or may not be familiar with ADA policy, but ADA policy says that if you are changing the pedestrian access route, which is the connection that a pedestrian would make between one curb ramp and another, if you change the nature of that pedestrian access route, then the entire thing has to be brought up to current ADA code. And there are no curb extensions currently on the west side of this intersection. It's just curb all the way around, even though you can see the sidewalk kind of flares out there as though there would be a curb ramp. And so we are limited here in terms of putting in high visibility crosswalks because there's no curb ramps. So there's liability and other legal restrictions that go along with that. So I think longer term, it's something that could be considered to build compliant curb ramps on those western corners, which would allow for some crosswalks to be painted in there. But currently we are not proposing that, due again to the nature of the project at hand. So we move northward, wait, go back. Up to Columbia.
Ashley,
And again,
sorry,
yes,
it's just a quick question.
sure.
Do these curb extensions have the same concept of including the flex posts as you were talking about on Oak?
Yes, they do. The little black dots there, you might not be able to see them at this
Okay.
scale on your screen, but they do
see.
have flex posts all around.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, that certainly helps with our visibility as well, as Sam
Right.
mentioned. Let's see. So continuing up to Columbia, we've heard that speeding through this intersection as folks come into South Pasadena is a real concern. And so what we've proposed here, this is sort of back of house for 2 large residences. So parking is probably not a big need in this section of Grand. So we've proposed 2 very long curb extensions here. Again, our goal is to visually narrow the street as people are coming into South Pasadena. And again, we've incorporated the bike lanes here. We know this is a big north-south bike connector, moving north and south through South Pasadena and up to the Rose Bowl. So we wanted to bring that into consideration. And so those would continue up to Columbia, at which point it would enter City of Pasadena. So if you see on the top row in this screen, there's a match line on the bottom for Hermosa Street. So imagine, if you will, taking Hermosa and then turning it 90 degrees counterclockwise. And so we'll go to the next page. And again, this, we are open to ideas, but we do have the same issue here. This street is only about 28 feet wide, including the gutter pans. And so with the city's minimum 22 feet for 2 11-foot lanes, we're fairly limited in terms of what we can do. I know there's been some suggestions to have some chicanes, so alternating curb extensions one side of the street and the other. Because the street's only 28 feet wide, they would necessarily be fairly shallow, but that is something we could look into. We know that there's some concerns. The north side of the street is okay with losing on-street parking, but we don't have consensus from the south side of the street if that is their feeling as well. So anything we would propose here would need some more community involvement and outreach with the residents. So we come up to Hermosa Street and Hillside, and this is currently an all-way stop, sort of a funky intersection. And so what we've proposed here is pulling out the stop bars on Hillside where they approach Hermosa Street. So we've increased the size of that turning of the, what is that? Like the triangle there on the corner. To make it more visible, it would be painted and have flex posts around it too. And separating out those movements, the Hillside through versus the Hillside right turn onto Hermosa. So, and then next slide is nothing groundbreaking. We know that there's some concerns about traffic movements here at Columbia. Again, we're open to looking at some solutions here, but the City of South Pasadena's jurisdiction does end at this location, and we have that driveway entering on the left side of the screen. So we're fairly limited again with what we can do here, although acknowledging that the free flow of traffic from Columbia onto Hermosa is certainly a problem, especially coming down that hill. So with that, I'll take questions on the Grand and Hermosa design.
Commissioner Fisher has his finger on the button, so I'll go ahead
Okay,
first.
thank you. Certainly on Grand Avenue, there are a lot of bicyclists, and you're proposing bike lanes. But in proposing the bike lanes and the edge lines, you're bringing opposing vehicular traffic closer to each other. Do you think in doing so that it should also include a dashed yellow center line?
In short, no, I don't. We are still providing 22 feet of space in the middle there, which is 2 11-foot lanes. The benefit of not putting in a yellow stripe is that yellow stripes have actually been shown on residential neighborhood streets to actually increase speeds. And the visual cues to drivers on Grand, they've still got 22 feet of space to work with in between these bike lanes. It will naturally bring down speeds to have brought in what they're perceiving as the edge of the roadway and being closer to vehicles that are coming in the opposite direction. There's no risk of head-ons in this situation, although I know the visuals here looking at these plans may make it look like it's narrower than it actually is. But we do still have 22 feet of space in between the bike lanes for vehicle navigation. And that's sort of one of the goals of this, is to narrow that space so that it does feel a little bit more constrained and drivers would slow down as they, especially as they're approaching another vehicle coming the other way, although they've got plenty of space.
Commissioner Hughes.
Ashley, just a quick question, going back to the question of the bike lanes. Are you starting those? Are they flowing, starting just at Grand, at Mission? Or where are you starting in them? You say you're ending in when you go into Pasadena, but we're starting them just at Grand and Mission?
Yes, you can see there in the top row, we would work through this design a bit more to determine what our queuing needs are for the southbound, particularly Grand traffic. But the bike lanes would terminate on the approach to Mission Avenue, and we would have warning signs or dashed bike lanes on that approach to make sure that we're giving enough space for the storage needs for vehicles coming up to that intersection at Grand for both the through and left turn and the right turn lanes.
And then would you have somewhere signage that would say bike lanes when you start? So that
Yes, there's that driveway there on the corner, and so our signage would come after that point.
Okay.
Yeah, and you'll notice throughout these plans that we haven't really outlined the proposed signage that would accompany these designs. So,
Thank you.
Commissioner Liu.
Yes, with regards to materials, with the discussion of how edge lines on oak would be difficult for a temporary installation, is there I guess an idea for using temporary paint in these locations where we're putting down bike lanes for the entire section of Grand that's in South Pasadena, or would we still be using tape?
that's something we need to talk about more as a team in terms of how we would move forward for implementation. As I mentioned with oak, this was my example to show, like, this is what we're talking about in terms of this is a really long distance to put in pavement tape, right? And so it can be done and it can be laid out in a straight line, but it's going to be tedious and a lot of labor for whoever's installing it. And so just in terms of that and also the durability of it, we would propose some kind of paint that maybe could be pressure washed off at some point. But again, then we start getting back into the aesthetics of this. And I know that the residents on these streets are going to be fairly concerned with the aesthetics of the design. So again, this project and the way that it moves forward would involve those conversations about how we are going to manage the materials and have designs that not only look good, but function well during the duration of the project itself.
Commissioner Hughes.
Mr. Chair. Ashley, in speaking when you're talking about the materials and the posts and such, have you penciled out your costs for this basically at all? Or is this just, you're looking just conceptually and you haven't put any numbers to this?
No, we've been working on the numbers as well. And part of that has been the materials discussion and, looking at different vendors for the different types of materials, the different manufacturers of the tape and so forth. We do have a cost estimate that we are currently working on. But again, this project has been very fast paced. So we will be providing those to the city before the end of the year, but they are not fully fleshed out yet.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Ashley, just a couple of questions. The first was with regard to signage, but Commissioner Hughes already asked that you addressed it. So looking at, so my concern is Hermosa Street. We don't really have anything proposed to address speeds going
Mhm.
both up and down. There's nothing, there really isn't anything except some minor adjustments at Hermosa and Hillside.
Mhm.
So I know you addressed some of the things you thought about. So with regard to Edgeline, your concern was that the street is too narrow for it?
Well, we could do edge lines here as well. Again, this comes back to this question of our materials and whether tape is going to be, providing the aesthetics and durability of what we're trying to achieve here. We did have a comment at some point, I think from the public engagement, about providing like a walking lane or something along Hermosa, but there's already sidewalks out here, and that, because of the way the gutter pan is, that 28 feet includes the gutter pan. So when we start looking at the actual width of the asphalt, we've only got about 24 feet out there to start with. And the city requires 11-foot travel lanes. So that really only gives us about a foot or two of wiggle room on either side.
So, oh, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
So I was just going to add that, so we could put in an edge line, but it's only going to be narrowing the street by about a foot or two on either side because the street is already so narrow.
Okay,
Some-
go ahead.
Something else that we considered is, could we put a bike lane on one side, which is often done on hilly streets where we need to have what's called a climbing lane for bicyclists. And that's something that we have looked at and talked about, but that's one of the options that would require engaging with the neighbors on the south side of the street, because climbing lanes are typically done in the direction of uphill bicycle traffic, which in this case would fall along the south side of the street, not the north side of the street where we already have agreement among the neighbors to get rid of the on-street parking. So that's one of the other options that we've looked at. In that case, we could put in a 6-foot bike lane along the south side of the street to serve as a climbing lane for northbound bicycle traffic. It really wouldn't serve much of a need on the north side of the street for southbound bicycle traffic because it's already downhill, and that's not the direction of difficult bicycle maneuverability for the street.
Right. And so with regard to lane widths, you said a couple of times that the city is requiring 11-foot travel lanes, right?
Yes, that's what we were told.
Okay, is that something, is there a minimum, putting aside what the city is telling you is required, is there a minimum, whether it's MUTCD or something else, minimum required travel lane?
Minimum recommended tends to be about 10 feet. That's what the city of Los Angeles uses. The city of Los Angeles also will go down to 9 feet on left turn lanes, but that's getting pretty pinchy. So 10 feet is sort of a minimum recommended in most situations.
Okay, so one of the ways of addressing this is potentially the city reducing or from 11 to 10, the minimum width, right? That's one
Correct.
remedy. So, and then another is a comment I just wanted to make sure you understood with regard to sidewalks. Most of Hermosa, starting at Columbia, does not have sidewalks. Starting
Right.
at Columbia and going all the way down, sidewalks don't really appear till just north of Floral Park Terrace.
Okay.
And even then, it's only one side of the street, and it's really only until you get south of Floral Park that both sides have it.
Okay.
So that's
Well,
interesting. You mentioned that neighbors talked about walking lane because that is something that's not there, right? So people are walking up and down the street in the
Mhm.
street because there's no other path. So just I want to make sure you knew that.
Okay, that's good to know and get clarification on that. I would still be concerned about doing that from an ADA compliance standpoint. It would not necessarily be an ADA compliant surface to put in a striped lane for people to walk in.
Okay.
But that's something that we heard and that we did not think was the correct solution for this location.
Okay. And then although there are no intersections on the north side of the street. So from Columbia all the way to, I believe, unless I have it wrong, all the way to Grand, the north side of the street, there are no intersecting streets. It's the south side that has intersecting streets.
Right,
So
but the issue there with ADA compliance is more that the surface has to be level and even and has to have a certain slope and can't
Oh,
have
gotcha.
things like the break between the gutter pan and the asphalt. We can't have things like that to make it
Understood.
ADA compliant.
Okay, gotcha.
Sure.
And then the last thing you mentioned were chicanes or curb extension type devices. Did
Mhm.
you have, were there certain locations that you looked at that you thought might be appropriate for a treatment like that? Or you hadn't gotten that far?
We have not gotten that far. And one of the concerns, again, is that we would be limiting parking on Hermosa on both sides of the street in short sections, right? So
Right.
it would be a matter of coordinating that with the driveways that are out there and site distance issues at the intersection. So again, it's certainly something that we can look at and, you know, develop concepts for, but it is going to impact parking on both sides of the street, not just the north side.
Right. Okay. Commissioner Fisher.
Yeah, is the width of Hermosa Street 24 feet?
It's 28 feet from the face of one curb to the face of the other curb.
Oh, okay. So with the concept of the 6-foot wide climbing lane going eastbound, that would leave 22 feet left for vehicular traffic then.
Correct,
I get it. Thank you.
correct.
Any other questions, comments for Grand or Hermosa? Okay, all right, Ashley, thank you very much.
All
We
right.
can
Yeah,
move on
thank
to the
you.
next.
All right, next is mission. So I'm sure there's going to be a lot of discussion on this. So I will walk through it fairly slowly, and then we can circle back as needed as we've done on the other locations. So as was mentioned before, we've taken a lot of considerations into this design. One that has affected quite a bit, especially on the more eastern end of the corridor, is the traffic analysis that was done by Iteris. We've incorporated the findings from that study into this design, and it has affected, you know, our intersection designs, where we need turn lanes, where we can get away without them, and then also places where we can successfully reduce our number of lanes versus where we cannot. So what you're seeing here is a situation where as we're coming into Mission, we are dropping a lane as we go east. And again, the traffic analysis supports this is not going to detrimentally affect traffic flow through the corridor. So let's see. So let's move from west to east. So you'll see in the top row there, again, this wraps to the bottom row and continues on to the next sheet. We have a lane drop, dropping the inside lane. And then we're coming down to Prospect Avenue, continuing on to Meridian and the Gold Line crossing. We have one location where we are relocating an existing bus stop, but that is not on this sheet. So here we are preserving the bus stop in the eastbound direction. You'll see there in the kind of the bottom center where that existing bus stop is located. This is great because it means that we aren't disrupting, transfers between bus passengers and rail passengers on the Gold Line. And the green that you see here, these are locations where we may be able to do some urban greening. So trees in pots, crash-worthy pots, and Lance is going to talk about that more in a moment, but that's just to explain what the different colors mean. The green is locations where we could potentially do some greening. The dark blue are proposed parklet locations. So there's not a parklet there now, but we have designed it so that one could be installed there. And then you'll see on the next sheet, Sam, can you go ahead and flip to the next slide? We also have this light blue color, and these are the locations where there are existing parklets out there currently. So what's the easiest way to explain this? Let's move through the corridor from west to east, and then we'll go back the other way. So just focusing on the eastbound direction, we've crossed the tracks at the Gold Line. There is an existing parklet here on the south side of the street just before you get to Diamond. But what we're proposing there and why it's dark blue is that we have expanded the size of it. Moving through the corridor, we have some head-in angled parking. along the south side here. A parklet proposed in the middle, and this could be shifted to the left or right, depending on where it was desired. Moving past Fairview, we have some more angled parking spots there on the bottom side, and you can see this large median. The greening proposed for this space may or may not happen as part of this project, but it is there if that is a treatment that can be incorporated. We have another dark blue parklet there on the south side of the street, followed by 3 parallel parking spots. And then turn lanes. We have a turn lane at Fairview and a turn lane at Fremont. We also have another bus stop there on the south side at Fremont. Can you go to the next slide? And then continuing on, we have some more parallel parking spots on the eastbound side. And then at this point, Iteris's traffic analysis told us that the queuing and storage needs for the intersection at Fair Oaks requires that at this point we add back in that second lane. So we have enough storage for both the through movement and the northbound left. So again, and we have that light blue parklet there just past Mound. So if we now go back the other direction, so working from Fair Oaks back towards Meridian, you'll see here we have the 2 traffic lanes coming through from Fair Oaks. And again, this is due to the analysis that Iteris did previously. We're moving through, and then we have a left turn lane. Sam, can you go back up a slide? At Fremont, which is where that second lane drops in this case. So the through lane continues on, and there is a there's a bus stop on the northeastern corner currently that we are proposing to relocate to the northwestern corner. You can see that call out there on the bottom row, just on the right. We have some parallel parking spots along here, and we're staying cognizant of the site distance requirements for all of these little driveways, particularly on the north side. There's quite a few that are narrow, but bordered on each side by a building. So we need to bear that in mind as we are coming through here with the design. So again, moving westward, we have relocated that bus stop at Fremont. We're moving past some parallel parking spots. We come up to Fairview, again on the top row of this sheet. There's an existing parklet there on the north side. We have another large proposed parklet on the north side at Diamond. And then moving through some more parallel parking spots, the existing parklet that's there. Can you back up one more slide, Sam? And we come to the Gold Line and Meridian. So this is where we continue through. We have 1 lane up until this point, but this is where it opens back out, and we add in that second lane. And there on the top row, just east of Orange Grove, is where we have matched back up with existing for both directions. So I know there's a lot to process here, but I'm happy to take questions.
Commissioner Hughes.
Ashley, thank you, Mr. Chair. A couple things. One, have you calculated how many parking spots we're going to lose altogether with this configuration?
We have not done that yet, no. I think we're actually adding spots compared to what's out there currently.
And then is there a concern looking at the Meridian and Mission where the Gold Line crosses? Because right now we have a lot of problems with when they're queued up, that they're making U-turns. And now you've got a parklet there, which could really jeopardize potentially with people wanting to make these U-turns, which they do, if they feel they're waiting too long. They want to back up and get out of there.
Sure.
that-
Yeah, that's something we will have to consider as we move forward with the design. Currently, we are proposing with the parklets, and Lance will speak to this again in a few moments, to have K-rail or concrete barrier around the outside of most of these parklet locations, which would make it so that no one can use that space as a U-turn area.
And then when you have the parklets, you're talking right now, the outdoor dining spaces that have been set up by the restaurants themselves right now, correct?
It,
That have
it
the
may be
supporting
that,
gateway.
some of them may be outdoor dining spaces associated with the restaurants. Others might just be activated spaces where there is, sort of like an urban park kind of space for people to relax and just,
But-
take a break in.
But you
Again,
don't know what
Lance
those are.
will-
I was gonna say, you don't know how those are configured right now. Like, what is their seating? Is it benches? Is it tables,
That's-
chairs,
that's-
umbrellas?
That's the next part of our presentation. So
Okay.
that's something that Lance will be able to speak to and when we get to that part of the presentation.
Commissioner Fisher.
Yes, let's go to the reach between Diamond and Fairview, where you proposed parklets on the north and south sides. I think you partially addressed this, but especially on the south side, I don't see any utility in the parklet there. I don't see why anyone would want to suddenly sit down and hang out in that block. There's no retail to serve it. There's no food outlet. And it just seems like gratuitous parklet space. Same thing on the north side. I think you've got, I could be wrong, the Videotech and the Land of Lucha there. Again, there's no food outlet there, so I'm not sure why people would want to hang out there.
So this again is something that Lance will speak to in the next section of our presentation, but the parklets are not meant solely to be eating locations. They can have urban furniture in them for, just sitting and reading the paper or whatever people do nowadays, sit and read your phone. And the one on the south side of the street there can be moved east or west to fit within that space. It could also all be converted to head and angled parking if that were what were desired. So it's not a locked in kind of thing, but it's not going to be exclusively eating space for restaurants either. So again, Lance will talk to some of that in a moment and how the spaces are programmed to be engaging and pull people in and make them, want to hang out in that space. Maybe there's games in that space or whatever it might be. But again, it's not just eating establishments.
Okay, then I had two more questions. If Mission were to be reduced to one lane in each direction, what I like about your plan is the provision of left turn lanes, especially where they don't exist now. However, at Meridian, that's the location where we need a left turn lane the most. When there are train preemptions, vehicles can be stranded in the intersection waiting for opposing traffic to clear before they turn left. And sometimes they're exposed in the railroad tracks a little bit too long. So I would think on the reach between Prospect and Meridian and Diamond, you could have room to put in your landscaping and whatever else, flower pots and such there. But near the intersection, you could stripe a left turn lane, which I think would promote safety and maybe help to clear up some of the congestion that occurs today and is inevitable to occur if this were to be implemented.
That is certainly something we can look at. This is based on the traffic analysis that Iteris did a few weeks ago when we were first brought on to do this project. There are some other plans for Meridian on the south side of the street that I think impact the way that this project would lay out. And another reason that we're not showing a left turn lane there at Meridian is that that affects our tapers and what we can do with the parklets on either side of that intersection. So we certainly can and would look at that in the next iteration of this design. But the traffic analysis done to date did not show that left turn lanes were needed there. But again, that's coming purely from a traffic flow standpoint. As you're saying, in terms of the preemption from the train and other complications, associated with the skew of that intersection with the railway, it is something that it sounds like some evasive maneuvering is needed in the space to go with that. So thanks for the
Yeah.
comment.
I wish the city would have required the left turn lane when the goal line was built, but it didn't happen. On the angled parking, like between Diamond and Fairview, et cetera,
Mhm.
do you really have enough room so that a vehicle would not stick out into the moving lane? It seems very tight.
It can look that way, and this is based on the city's standards for angled head-in parking. There were two different variations that we looked at. There's the 45-degree angle, which is what you're seeing here. There's also a 60-degree version where it would be a little bit more like pointed in towards the curb, if you can imagine that. And that's what had actually started out with this design, but the width of the, if you think about it in terms of a parking lot, you've got your parking stalls and then you've got the aisles. And the aisles here is being served by the travel lane. And the 45-degree angled parking only requires a 13-foot aisle, which again, in this case is the travel lane. And so here we wanted to make the travel lanes as visually narrow as we could, again, for the same reasons that we did on Oak and Grand, where that visually narrowed space encourages slower speeds. Whereas the angled parking at the 60-degree angle requires a much larger distance behind the parked vehicle in order to park out or to back out of the parking spot and maneuver into the travel lane. So that's why we have chosen the 45-degree angle here. And it can be deceptive, but these stalls are, long enough to achieve that. It's not labeled here, the depth of that parking stall, but I believe it's about 22 feet.
Okay, thank you for that. The only follow-up comment I would have to that is that everyone recognizes the difficulty in backing out of an angled parking space. And it isn't a problem on those streets that have light volumes because there's a lot of gaps between vehicles on the main street. But there is difficulty and there is a lot of traffic on Mission. And with one lane, there will be a steady flow, I believe. So I just think everyone needs to really give a lot of thought to the pros and cons of the angled parking. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Vice Chair Fisher. Commissioner Liu.
Yeah, actually, I guess just kind of piggybacking on Commissioner Fisher's comment about the westbound approach and the need for a westbound left. Did the Iteris traffic study recommend that westbound right movement as the one that should be a drop lane and kind of have a shared, left through as the number one lane? I just find it a little,
Yes.
oh, okay. I just find it a little surprising because that westbound right turn movement never seemed to be the congested movement, just, based on anecdotal, walkabouts.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think the Iteris study found that, as well as some of the public engagement that was conducted beforehand, really wanted to keep that that right turn from Mission to northbound Meridian. There are some concerns about when there is someone there trying to make that right turn, that it backs up the through movement, I believe was one of the sentiments about that. So.
Okay, thank you. And I would also encourage consideration of maybe opening up that it almost looks like a two-way left turn median at the intersection, the 11-foot wide one. Maybe at least provide even just a 9-foot wide left turn pocket for maybe even just one or two cars, because
Are you talking about the green colored space in this drawing?
yeah. I would say, just based on from my own observations without having seen the traffic study of what it would look like and kind of with project condition, that just it's not a heavy movement, but when there is a westbound left there, it does tend to back up that through movement
Okay.
based on the nature of peak hour travel there.
I think that's something that we would want to propose to Iteris and have them run the analysis again with that included.
Okay. Okay, and I really appreciate what's done for the mid-block crossings at Diamond and Fairview. I think that's a big safety improvement to cut down those 2-lane approaches to a uncontrolled crossing to just a single lane crossing. So, you know, you don't have that situation where a car passing another car doesn't see that the first car stopped because there's a pedestrian there.
Right.
Yeah, so with that in mind, was there anything that can be done for Mission at Mound, where we do have a, you know, uncontrolled crossing across 4 undivided lanes? Or I understand that we have to keep the travel lanes, but is there consideration for maybe maybe not a full traffic like pedestrian refuge, but at least some sort of I don't know, painted median or maybe even, I know
Well,
we already have the, yeah.
Yeah, our widths are such right here that because of the existing curb extensions, we don't have a lot of space for median space.
Okay.
But it may be something that, like, if we look a little bigger picture, you know, if this is a crossing that needs additional treatments, there are other things that we can do that are maybe outside the scope of this project, but something like an RRFB, a rectangular rapid flashing beacon, maybe something here that would help. Again, you brought up that multiple threat problem where one vehicle is stopped and the one coming up has not seen the pedestrian yet. And you're right, that would be a concern here. We certainly can look at some other alternatives for how to manage that crossing maneuver, but I think it may take some other types of interventions that, again, we can't really do with tape and flex posts. So I think it's definitely a location worth considering some other supplementary designs.
Okay, thank you. That's completely understandable. And thank you for thinking through that.
Sure, and thank you all for the comments. This is really helpful.
If I could just follow up on Commissioner. I recognize that putting in other traffic control devices may be beyond the scope of your project, but I think you could put in yield line markings 20 to 30 feet back from the intersection, and that would address the issue of a car being unable to see beyond the other stop car for a pedestrian crossing. And the yield line markings would not be an expensive item.
That would help. It does not get rid of the multiple threat issue, because the issue with that is that, say if you've got 2 vehicles approaching that crosswalk and one of them has stopped, the issue is that the car that stopped first is blocking the view of the car that's approaching second. In terms of the second driver cannot see through the vehicle to see the pedestrian that's already in the crosswalk. And so they don't always stop because they're not sure why the first driver yielded or stopped in the first place. So I think we would need some other types of treatments here to really draw attention to this crossing and try to get rid of that multiple threat condition to the extent we can.
But I thought the yield line markings 30 feet back did that, and that if the stop car is 30 feet back, it gives the other car a better angle to see the pedestrian.
It can help, but not everyone stops for yield markings if they don't see what it is they're supposed to be yielding to. And the that's kind of where that multiple threat issue comes in. If it's not a forced stop sign where you're required to stop regardless, yielding happens. But if you don't know what it is you were supposed to see to yield to, it doesn't always happen that way.
Okay, I have a few questions for you, Ashley. So in no particular order, since you mentioned RRFBs, which I think would be a great idea for Mound. I wanted to make sure you were aware that RRFBs are planned for Mission at Fairview and Mission at Diamond. I don't know if it has any impact on what you've designed, but I just wanted to make sure you were aware of that.
I was not aware of that. I don't know that it really impacts our design at Diamond, or did you say Fairview?
Yes.
Okay, I don't think it affects Diamond. We might have to rethink Fairview with that in mind.
Okay. I just wanted to make sure you were aware of that. And
I was not, thank you.
and for Mound, not to beat it to death, but if you know, Diamond, Fairview, and Mound are probably the three most heavily used crossings that are not protected by a signal or otherwise. So and I'll note Mound, like the other two, in the middle of the street, we have those raised pedestrian warning signs or paddles that have some benefit, but that does demonstrate that there is some issue there. So if you think there's anything from Mound that you can do, it would be welcomed. So if you just keep that in mind. The other couple of comments. So there was some discussion regarding Mission at Meridian and the possibility of left turn pockets. I just want to remind everyone, and I think it makes a difference, but I'll defer to the engineers, that we do have, I think, both AM and PM turn restrictions at that intersection. So I think that might have an impact on whether we can install a left turn pocket, but I'll defer to the experts. And then, you guys can weigh in a moment, but I just want to remind everybody of that. You mentioned the use of the continued use of K-rail, which I think some think is less than aesthetically pleasing. And I was wondering if you had considered other options or alternatives to protect the parklets.
Sure. So to your first point, we are aware of those time of day turn restrictions. I, have not done the traffic analysis myself. That's on Iteris to do, but I would assume that part of that is because currently there are 2 lanes there that are not designated as through or left. It's, so any left turn that would happen there during a peak hour would also necessarily be blocking the through movement. And that may be why there's no turn lane there currently. But again, that would take some traffic analysis to figure that out.
That's a good point.
Yeah. As far as the K-rail goes, I'm coming at this from an engineering standpoint where I'm concerned about the liability of, errant cars, like just bulldozing into things. We seem to have issues with that in our society these days. So that is my concern, is making something that is crash proof for, any vehicle that may or may not come into that space or try to. I know K-rail is ugly, and I fully agree with that. And one of the things, again, that Lance is going to speak about in the next section of our presentation is some cladding options that could be put over top of the K-rail that mimic wood paneling or what have you, to make it a little less concrete-y. So he will talk to that, but I agree with you that K-rail is not much to look at. So we do have some options for what could be used to augment that from an aesthetic standpoint.
Okay, and the last question I had is, did you take a look at, and I'm all for green and landscaping in the median, in the middle of Mission, it would be very attractive, but did you think about the possibility of a 2-way turn lane? And I ask because I believe there are a number of driveways scattered throughout the length of the street, access to which would be blocked through a concrete median, or a landscape medium of some kind. Did you think about that? I mean, I understand they can go to the next intersection and turn around, but
Yeah, we have thought about, and that's one of the things that limits the options here in terms of greening these spaces. We wanted to provide that as an option because we heard from the community that that was something that they would really like to see. But you're right, that does limit our driveway mobility, both coming in and out of these driveways to, if it were like in this, what we're looking at right now, if it were completely greened up from one end to the other, that means that all of our driveways are going to have to be right in, right out only,
Right.
which, obviously is a concern. And so that's something that we would refine moving this design forward is where do we need to provide that mobility across this, quote unquote median space to, provide driveway access.
Right. Okay. Thank you. Commissioner Hughes.
Ashley, two questions on your median with your greenery and such. One, is there concern about you've got no water source there in the middle of the street? And so the question then becomes, how do we maintain? And then to get all this going, we're going to take a lot of water, which is scarce. So, and is there a thought of, obviously greenery at this point, no matter what kind of landscaping materials, is pretty expensive. So have you calculated those costs as well? And then if there is no water source there, then you have to do hand watering by truck. And is that calculated? Because that will have to maintain and continue.
So that is not something that we are looking at from the engineering side. That is more on the landscape architecture side that Arroyo Group will be speaking to in the next portion of the presentation.
Thank you.
Commissioner Fisher.
Yes, in answer to Chair Abelson's comment about the no left turn restriction during the peak periods. That's true. If a left turn lane were provided, those restrictions would come out. But I view it as more of a safety concern, particularly for the eastbound and northbound movement, to avoid a vehicle that is wanting to turn left and is waiting for the opposing vehicles to clear, and the train preemption has started and the bells are clean and the gates are about to go down and he's waiting for that last car to clear before he can turn left. I view it more as a safety concern. But with regard to the bigger issue, this is the second most congested intersection in the city. And when a few years ago, when we identified improvements at this intersection with regard to the railroad preemption and the operation of the signal, one of the things we identified was that there needs to be variable green time for Mission Street. Right now, it'll get 28 seconds, period. Even after a double train preemption, it gets 28 seconds and cars queue back to almost Orange Grove Avenue. So the idea was that there's additional hardware and signal improvements that are ultimately required here to make the intersection operate better. And I think those would be necessary with the reduction in lanes to have advanced detectors to tell you when there is a queue so that you could provide more green time on Mission Street rather than the pre-timed 28 seconds. So it is my understanding that those types of improvements to mitigate the impacts of the lane reduction at the second most congested intersection in the city are beyond the scope of this project. Is that correct?
That is beyond the scope of what we've been asked to do. It may be part of what Iteris has been looking at. And any kind of modifications to turn lanes and so forth at this intersection, I think would necessarily have to be fully phase separated. So I wouldn't think it would be a situation where the northbound or the east to northbound left turn would be yielding to oncoming traffic. I think they would have to have their own phase within the cycle to make that movement. So
Agreed.
Okay. Any other questions, comments for Mission? No. All right. Thank you
Okay.
very much, Ashley.
thank you. Appreciate all your feedback.
Well, thank you everybody for staying with us to this. And now we're going to turn it over to the Arroyo Group, who will be talking about urban design and placemaking. I'm going to stop sharing my screen and turn it over to Philip Burns from the Arroyo Group, who will intro this portion of the presentation. It looks like, Phil, you're muted right now. Deanna, can you address that?
Thank you. Great. Got it here. Just the usual, Zoom learning curve here. So anyway, I appreciate it, Sam, and appreciated Ted. And
Phil, I'm sorry to interrupt, you, but we can't see your screen. Are you trying to share your screen just yet or not yet?
we will begin sharing it now.
Okay, no problem.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for.
Of course.
Yeah, sure. So at this point, I'd like to take a step back again after we've been looking closely at these plans and kind of review again the goals for the urban design and placemaking aspects of the Mission Street concept. And I think that it's important for us to remember that what we are talking about today is a demonstration originally conceived as a 3-month project in which we would be able to test out changes to the street and be able to gauge the effects of those changes. Indeed, it's probably, it may even be possible to learn and go, modifying some of the things as the demonstration goes along in the future, while at the same time also laying out kind of framework for what a long-term permanent change to Mission Street could look like if deemed successful by the community in the city. And so as we look at that, the shorter term demonstration here along Mission Street, the first goal, of course, is to continue to support the economic recovery of businesses by providing outdoor spaces. As you heard from Wes, a key issue with that and a key issue for making it potentially viable in the longer term is to really improve the quality, the consistency, and the comfort of those spaces. It is interesting, I'm sure you all have seen how different businesses have used different approaches, some more permanent and elegant, others, perhaps more, they look a little bit more jerry-rigged in order to provide spaces that have the necessary shade, that have the necessary protection from vehicles and other things like that. The third goal, as we look at what this street can be, is to provide a range of program for a couple of reasons. When I say range of program, that means like a range of activities that can happen within the new spaces that are created along Mission Street. One is to serve a variety of businesses, and we'll talk about that in a moment. Another is because a variety of activities also increases the vitality and attraction of the corridor, and it provides spaces for people to come out and engage at different times of day, not only when they're eating a meal, but also at other times and in other places. Interestingly, I'm sure you all will know that it's common for people to purchase food, for example, at the cafes along Mission or on El Centro and head over to the park by the library and sit and eat there, right? And so if we can create different spaces for those kinds of activities, not just sitting and being served by a waiter, but also other kinds of activities that other kinds of things that you want to do, will create a more engaging environment for people doing different things. Fourth, increasing the walkability of the street. And we've talked quite a bit about that today. Fifth, adding greening to the corridor. As we heard, that was a major thing that was important during our preliminary outreach. And then overall, in general, what is this about? This is about improving the experience of Mission Street as one coherent Main Street district, all the way from Meridian, or a little bit west, actually, maybe from Prospect, all the way down to Fair Oaks. The draft general plan of South Pasadena talks about it as a city with 2 great streets, 2 great districts, Fair Oaks and Mission. And so this, I think, would be an important aspect of making Mission the great street that the community wants it to be. the next slide here. So as we look at, what this full demonstration will do that Ashley has just walked us through, step by step, you can see there along the bottom of the screen, as we're tracing out, the entire corridor, and in dark blue there, the new proposed areas that could work for parklets, and the lighter kind of cyan existing parklets along there. That in the station area district, really there is the potential to create a strong grouping of parklet locations. And of course, this is a first guess at where those locations could come. They could be moved around, certainly, as a part of further refinement of this. But when you create spaces on both sides of the street, now you're creating a vital district, and you're also helping people want to cross the street. Yesterday, just as it happened, I happened to be crossing Mission at Diamond with my 4-year-old son. And I appreciated in live there how cars did not stop for me, even with my young son in the middle of the crosswalk. And so when we're physically, and certainly those things can be addressed through things such as RFPs, but when we physically narrow the corridor and we bring more people out onto both sides of the street, what we're doing is we're addressing those safety issues through reducing speed. And I think that in the long term, that's going to be the best way to address safety. It's also going to be the best way to increase comfort and vitality for the people, in visiting the businesses and using the district. As we move west to east across the corridor, we see that there are a bit fewer options, for a bit fewer places recommended for parklets in the central and eastern parts of the corridors, but there are some certainly that will provide local benefit to adjacent businesses. And then, if the desire really is to create a fuller strolling experience along the entire corridor, there's also the option to take areas that are parking and convert them into parklets. There's also, of course, the reverse, right? The option to take areas that are proposed as parklets and convert them to more parklets. So it's a flexible scheme. And then finally, in the center of the street, as we've discussed, potential trees and pots, rather greening elements in the median could really make a strong statement in terms of unifying this street as one cohesive and important corridor. And so with that, I'll hand it over to Lance Lowry, who will speak more about the landscape vision and the demonstration that we have proposed for tonight.
Thank you, Phil. Hello, everyone. Good evening. Thanks for having us tonight. As Phil mentioned, my name is Lance Lowry. I'm the placemaking practice leader with the Arroyo Group. I've been working with the Alta team and Wes's team to think about a future demonstration, a full demonstration for Mission Street as a complete experience and district. And so we wanted to kind of zoom in on outside of the sort of demonstration of the roadway. This slide focuses on two really important spaces that will result from the roadway improvements and slowing the traffic along Mission. We have the spaces that you're seeing in blue largely represent existing parklet spaces, but also spaces that we could use that are existing parallel parking places for new parklet spaces or ways that we could extend the streetscapes out to become new spaces along Mission. The demonstration, as it happens, on the roadway is creating a unique opportunity that you're seeing in dark blue here to create deeper, wider spaces that could potentially take over angle parking places, which would add another 10 feet onto what, or 9 feet onto what the current situation allows us to do for parklets along Mission. So with each has kind of a pro and con about the way that we could use those spaces and elements in our toolkit of a way to create a more vibrant and connected Mission Street district. The parallel parking places that you're seeing in cyan here, we can turn off and on fairly easily along with what's existing on Mission, where the angle parking really only would likely happen where we're doing the demonstration. But the pro of that situation would be obviously bigger, wider spaces, and another 9 feet on top of the existing sort of 9 feet of a parklet will add a huge range of new opportunities that we could use for pedestrians and programming. And so we're going to do our best. Thank you everyone for the great questions that you had related to the landscape, architecture, placemaking, and just overall experience questions that you had. We've been writing those down, so I'm going to do our best to circle back and help answer those. One of them was regarding programming of the parklet spaces, and I think as Phil mentioned, when we think of a parklet and public realm in general, one of the best ways that we can make it a more vibrant and active district is really to provide places for everybody to do things all year round, right? And so when we think of parklets, for instance, they largely are used for outdoor dining. So they're largely spaces that are framed out and protected and then are just empty, and that restaurants can then fill the tables and chairs and they serve that restaurant. But that's not the only thing that they can be, and they're really space, and within space that we can do a lot of different things. And so not every parklet needs to be for outdoor dining. There's cafes, there's ice cream shops, there's bars, there's just the need to just be outside, and offer greening. And so when this slide kind of captures a little bit about the other types of programming that we might consider when we look at these parklet spaces. And so with the space in front of the parking lot that we just identified, even though there's not an adjacent business, the need for being able to have a space outside to eat your lunch, we saw directly south of them, that area being used for that. So we think that the more of these spaces that we can combine along Mission will give that opportunity to create different places for different people, and in turn, ultimately more vibrancy and more activity along the street. So we can talk more about that as we dive into this more. We've also identified some places within the demonstration concept for urban greening, potentially in the roadway. And that is something that we could consider through potted plants and other things. You can see some of the pictures here. Those offer a really good opportunity to, again, tie the district together through a sort of a repetitive element that would define the district. They would help soften the district, and importantly also trees in the roadway, or at least on the sides of the roadway, will help slow traffic down as well. They offer a real strong vertical element to the street that, again, studies have shown that sort of helps narrow the perception of the roadway and in turn slows traffic down. So that would be something that we would really like to try to implement, and you'll see more about that in some of the concepts coming up. As we talked about in the beginning, there's sort of two aspects to this presentation tonight. We just sort of talked about the full vision for Mission, and we have the opportunity with some current funding to, before the end of the year, to utilize spending on ways to implement some of that vision in the near term or right away. So the next couple of slides focus on the option that we could have to focus some of the funding on a demonstration parklet or demonstration parklets. And we would seek advice and comment on some of the options that we've started to show here that cover a bracketing range of potential demonstration parklet directions that we could go. We've tried to focus these on potential demonstration parklets that would not necessarily be tied to one business or one location, as we know that with the limited amounts that we could spend initially, we were hoping that we could keep these demonstration parklets more generic or more for a general overall public benefit as an option, but that's something that we can discuss more of today too as well. So again, we have several different potential directions that we could go. as we've identified, the timeline for this is very short. So we're going to have to make some quick decisions, and that's been a large driver of what we're showing tonight is this sort of timeline that we're on. And so the slide that you're seeing now is a company, it's a Scandinavian company that specializes in outdoor furniture and outdoor spaces called Vestra. And this is a company that we know from some of the work that we've done in Glendora that has also used a very similar system, or that has used this system, this supplier. They offer furniture, they offer prefabricated parklet systems, or the pieces that you need to build some of these outdoor spaces. Another important driver as we started to look at this was the issue of the K-rail, and how can we utilize that real important feature of these parklets for safety as one idea and one option, and utilize that in a way that it can still be part of an overall space and feel like it's connected and not feel like it's just an added on piece of infrastructure, or often the way that it's currently used, just sort of painted over with art and things. So we've shown a range of that. We've shown some options that you'll see that that look at systems without K-rail, and then some ways that we might clad it or make it or beautify it. And so these are, again, these slides are focused on a short-term, near-term solution, and we'll also talk about sort of a process where we could design parklets in full that would offer more complete solutions as we have more time on the project. So with this, this company offers a whole range of real interesting types of furniture. Again, we've tried to organize some ideas around how we could create some demonstration parklets focused on spaces that could be very generic or be used by multiple types of people. The company offers a flooring system that you're seeing here that's a complete kit of the floor, the raised flooring, the leveling feet, and a way to kind of connect it to the existing sidewalk. So that's sort of the panel that you're seeing here. And then on the perimeter, we've started to look at ways that we could use the K-rail systems and sort of tighten them back or transition them back to the ground, or a way that they don't feel so heavy and bulky. There are oftentimes the K-rails are twisted and churned on the sides to protect the ends of the parklet spaces, but that turn or that bend within the K-rails feels very heavy and not so elegant oftentimes. And so we've proposed, or we've started to show ways to bridge these systems of the Vestra floor system and then the K-rails, where we could maybe transition them down and use heavy pots, vehiculated pots at the end to help the parklets feel a little bit more open at the ends, but still protected on the roadway sides. And you're seeing some elevations of those here. They do make some K-rail components that you're seeing down here where they do transition down. This is showing a shorter segment. They do also have longer sort of 10-foot long versions of those as well. But that could be part of this initial order. And those are things that we could identify and quantify fairly quickly to be able to get these elements in a near-term order. And so some examples of pots, we would need to select those as well. So we're working through that. And again, would love some advice or comment from the team on how that could work. Again, we've run through several different scenarios here, how we could use some of Vestra's furniture and formations into creating different spaces within these parklets. This is showing a double-sided bench where people could gang up on, and they have this little stadium seat element. It's also very interesting that could create these coves and these different seating opportunities for people. And so one thought was that we could order a range of this furniture as one idea and option, and then when the time comes and when we want to build this, so we could try them in different formations as well. These are heavy elements. No one could come in and just pick them up and steal them. It would take a team of people, but we could move them around and shift them around to demonstrate and try different types of spaces. And if we are able, and we'll talk about budgets for the parklets and the improvements that we're suggesting and how many of these elements we might be able to get, but we could put them in several different formations to, again, demonstrate and test what types of things people respond to best. This is showing an example of the stadium seat bridging off into the sidewalk to, again, better engage the streetscape, capture people that are walking in the street and help pull them into some of these spaces. Again, sort of blurring the line between where, you typically see a little rectangular parklet and everything's on that. And it's a little wafer of the space, but we don't have to necessarily do that if we can think about the spaces differently. And that's what these little studies that we prepared are trying to do, is prove out as quickly as we could a few ideas of how the spaces could work with the idea of a near-term order, but help us feel like we were making a good decision in terms of how we were ordering these elements and things, again, in a very short amount of time here. So one of the other furniture elements proposed on this particular study was showing these bench seats that are a little deeper. We were proposing to organize them against the K-rails, so a lot of the furniture elements would help hide the backside or the streetscape facing side of the K-rails, and again, focus people's attention back towards this more social side of the streetscape. Again, this is another system that same company offers. These are little squares of bench and planter combinations of different heights. We could gang up the elements in the center to create a high spot that could then sort of terrace down, again, hiding the K-rails, focusing the social and seating areas towards the streetscape where people and dining or restaurants would be, happening on the other side. We would need to work with the team to establish a color range or a vocabulary of an aesthetic vocabulary of these elements that would work with the city and would express colors and other aesthetic elements that would tie in with the city. And so that would be something we would also look for suggestions on. From sidewalks and observations, we've seen a lot of the streetscapes and building colors and things seem to be in these sort of yellow and red ranges, but also some greens as well. And so the examples that you're seeing on a lot of these slides are bright, bold, contemporary colors. And we certainly wouldn't have to do that. We would want all these elements to fit into South Pasadena. And so that's something else that we can keep in mind as we look at this. Another system, and I'm going to try to work through this as fast as we can because I know this has been a long call already. This system, again, we're thinking about bracketing directions here so we can feel like we've touched on a range of different ways that we could look at these parklets for a near-term order to, again, utilize these funds. This system is an Australian system, and it basically comes in a large protected edge barrier with a canopy and flooring component to it as well. And so our hope with this system, if this was a direction that we decided we wanted to go, would be that this heavy outside edge would be vehicular rated and protected. It is saying that it's vehicular rated just to a degree. And so that we wouldn't have to use K-rails on this. So we could use that system as the protected edge. The system is it's much simpler than the other concepts, whereas it's a planter, a bucket seat on the inside, and then just open space underneath the rest of the parklet that could be used for other furniture elements. And in which case we would suggest maybe a local furniture supplier that could fill in the spaces under the same funding that we would use for these. And some studies that show how that would lay out on the scale and the size that we were using to quantify. And then the other sort of third approach that we looked at was maybe some ways that we could just create the core custom components utilizing the K-rail edges that we understand are probably the safest route to being able to implement these spaces successfully, just from a pure safety standpoint. So we could look at a system where we start to clad the K-rails, with wood cladding or aluminum cladding, and then maybe providing a custom canopy system. We've done a fair amount of exhaustive studies on the shade aspects for these parklets and understanding that a canopy over top of these areas only really provides a very small window of actual shade during the day. The low sun, moving from east to west across the day really creates very different dynamic solar conditions within these spaces, and parklets are applied on opposite sides of the road. And so the shade conditions are almost impossible to fully predict with one system. So we would need some sort of variable system. And so this is starting to kind of address that. I think there's another slide that talks about the shading in more detail. Cladding for these parklets could be, we could find some very effective ways to do that, which would look good architecturally. There's ways to hide the hardware, so the rusting and all that doesn't happen. We can create clean lines with the wood. We can implement a combination of wood and aluminum siding to or aluminum edging to create some more contemporary looking parklet design aesthetics. There's systems that we use in landscape architecture for rooftop construction that utilize these pedestal feet that you're seeing here in the images that are at the level so that they can deal with changing grade conditions and changing slopes, but still keeping the surfaces level. And those can be used with wood cladding. They can be used with stones and things to create these raised floors. The real cost-effective way to do that. And then they could just butt up right against the K-rails on the outside. And so that would be a system that we could look at. This is looking again at the shading, and shade doesn't have to be heavy-handed. It doesn't have to be hard closed panels. There's ways to mute the sun and to create more elegant shade patterns and daylighting that could be really elegant. This is looking at weighted fabrics that could be used in the district. And so these custom systems would take more design effort, but there's things like the cladding and the flooring that we could do right away within the budgets and the near-term budgets that we have to implement. And then, utilizing a varied range of other furniture types, local furniture that we could use within the parklets that we create to create different social spaces and conditions. So we're looking at that to place an order as well.
And so, of course, the question becomes also, what does this cost? And, I have to caveat this by saying, as everyone has said throughout this entire process, been a very abbreviated design process. And so we don't have the full, specificity that we would probably, desire for these kinds of things. However, there is a bucket of money that's available, right? Originally, $420,000 was allocated by Metro for this Slow Streets program. And $100,000 of that was allocated towards the actual purchasing of materials. However, with the compressed timeline and the reduction, the reduction that there are in all the labor, as well as the actual staging of the roadway demonstration itself, which will not be able to be completed by December 31st. There is potentially up to $300,000 that remains available from this grant. And as Ted mentioned at the beginning, I think he's still conducting meetings with Metro to determine if indeed all of that funding is available to be able to purchase elements. If that is the case, how far does $300,000 take us? It could take us with the Vestra system. It could buy us basically 4 parklets. I want to say 4 parklets of the size that you saw there, which is a parallel parking size. It's a size that can be implemented today without any changes to the roadway. With all showing, each of the parklets, one of the different demonstrations that Lance just described. And then also, also being able to purchase the K-rails that would go on the sides of those, the planters that would guard those parklets in the front and back, and then 24 additional planters with demonstration trees that could be located in other areas of the streetscape, whether on the sidewalk or if the demonstration is implemented in the median. And then moving to the next slide, it's kind of similar thing. If we were to do a custom parklet, of course, with a custom parklet, we're less defined in terms of what the actual costs would be. However, probably the material, it is likely that it actually would be cheaper to get the same kinds of things. And so potentially the $300,000 could, again, purchase and basically be able to construct 4 temporary or semi-permanent parklets, probably with canopies, unlike the Vestra system that we described at the beginning. And then again, about 24, additional planters that could be distributed along. And the final thing we have here in the presentation is we're not going to get into a lot of detail on this today, but the point of this is that cities take different approaches to this. Lots and lots of cities, of course, are thinking about this same thing right now. And we see a wide variety of approaches in terms of how much design the city wants to put into something to ensure consistency versus how much creativity do they want to have and let businesses kind of do their own thing. And you also see variation in terms of how much of the cities pay for these actual parklets upgraded parklets to be installed versus how much do they put it on businesses to pay for those themselves. And so those are considerations going forward as well. With that, we will take your questions on the urban design and placemaking section of the presentation. Thanks so much for your patience.
Well, thank you both for an excellent presentation. There are a lot of exciting ideas here. Commissioners, anybody? Let's see, Commissioner Hughes, like to start.
Thank you very much for that great information. A few questions. When you were looking at the sidewalk with the furniture that was going from the parklet onto the sidewalk with the angle, is that a concern? That one for ADA for the sidewalk? And then with all these, and then with the calculations here, you're saying this is the 300,000. What is the allocation for what we were looking at earlier for Grand and Hermosa? Where are those calculations on those costs? We can put out all the costs together.
So I could jump in there. The actual taping costs have not been calculated yet. That would there's too much dependent on how that public outreach would result in terms of how that striping would actually implemented. So our focus here was not to recommend the striping materials necessarily because it could change rapidly given the rest of the design process. With that said, it would Alta, I believe, said that they were going to work this month to try to calculate more costs.
Okay, so that's kind of just conceptual, not for execution.
Exactly.
Okay.
All of it's really conceptual, not for execution, with the exception of purchasing materials that could be used in a variety of circumstances. But again, that's where the risk is that since we don't know what the execution would look like, purchasing these materials, again, there's some risk in that.
Okay. So then looking at this, the ADA concern and the other is, so the calculations you just showed, the 286,000 or the other option, right now that includes the materials for the landscaping as far as the pots, but it doesn't include any landscaping materials at all. So that would be in addition to that we would need to calculate and come up with.
Phil, I think, are you able to speak?
Thank you. So I think I joined as a participant, and so I am not able to. So I'm sorry about that. Yeah, the costs that are in there actually they assume a tree planted within the pots.
I'm sorry, it's hard to understand. So that does calculate trees and greenery within those containers?
Yes, it does.
And do you know what you calculated? Are they hopefully they're not water intensive or something we're going to have a liability issue on as far as the trees that have a lot of dropping? Because we've had that issue on Mission Street before with ficus trees and some other trees we've had where we had a lot of debris and it caused a lot of problems for us as a city. So we calculated what the species and the type and what is appropriate.
Yeah, certainly.
Water usage.
In terms of the planting, we would definitely, go through an exhaustive, search for the right plant material, low water use, probably evergreen. So we haven't gotten to a plant selection at the moment, but we would definitely hope to do that.
And the last question is, when you talked about the, from vestry or other sources, are you concerned with supply chain issues right now to get deliverables?
They have let us know that the lead time is 4 months to be able to receive the materials. So that is a delay. However, in terms of the funding, the key thing is just that the order be placed by the end of this month.
Okay, so the inventory should be there at some point when we do make the order within the time frame before we lose our timing, but that you're looking at a four month for delivery minimum.
Yeah. Sorry, we were on mute when a lot of these questions were being asked, so apologies if we have to re-go over those. There was an ADA question as well. So, but yeah, the sidewalks are 10 feet on the ADA issue, and we would only expect something to poke in for a few feet. So we wouldn't expect an ADA issue there. And then procurement, that's a worldwide problem right now, it seems like. So, the Vestra does have, they do have facilities here in California, and they also, we know that we've built projects with them in Glendora and other places here in California. So it's not like it's just an issue of time and supply, really more than the ability to actually get here and be implemented. So we're pretty comfortable with that system, and that's one of the reasons we looked at it. The interesting kind of non-table and chair furniture systems that they had, but also that they were operating here in California.
The last question I had was related to the parklets that you're creating right now that you're saying are not food related, but are more experience in nature for activity or seating or.
Yeah, for the
art.
demonstration parklets, yeah.
Do you have a concern about lighting and power being supplied to any of those, or needing that for those areas for safety, lighting concern for, evening hours or twilight hours?
Yeah, that'll be a question going forward that we'll have to talk about. What are the safety goals for these? They do have battery powered systems and some solar powered systems that create, with LED lighting that are pretty efficient, but they'll never be, like having electricity out to the site. So it's really also an issue of the long-term, the parklet design and how we would implement those. So there are some systems that we could use, but the hope would be that, for more long-term parklet design, we would have the ability to go through all those systems: planting, irrigation, lighting, signage and branding. There's sort of many layers to these parklets. That have to get considered when you're thinking about these, and that lighting and electricity is one of them for sure.
The other last thing, just an addendum to this, is the concern about the spaces that potentially could be sort of taken over from a homeless situation, which has occurred. I know in certain areas of LA, they did a bunch of planting and different things, and they ended up being used inappropriately and sleeping and such. So I just don't know if we've got a concern for, creating a destination that could be used not for its true manner, if you will.
Yeah, well, that's a very important issue. Like the concept that you're seeing here, and again, these are just sort of like several different combinations that we put together to try different things. But these shallow bench lounge elements are only, I think, 4.5 feet sort of wide. So I suppose you could sleep on those, but we did use the smaller elements for the reason that they would be hard to kind of lay out completely on. And same thing with these staircases. They're not very big, and you probably end up tumbling down them before you actually got a good night's sleep on them. But that is an issue, and how they're patrolled and sort of all the aspects. And so again, we have two prongs to this. We have the sort of demonstration testing phase, and then long-term parklet design for the mission district, and how those would all be rolled out and implemented and patrolled and all that stuff. So I guess our hope is that in the near term for the demonstration, it can also be used to test that, right? Like we can actually see what's working, what's not with these furniture elements, and how are these being used inappropriately, and how can we combat that? I mean, I love these demonstration projects because it's the perfect time to do all that and figure it out. And how can we make these better for the whole entire district now?
Yeah, because in the eastern part of the city, there was an issue of someone taking over one of the bus stop benches for months. And it became a real issue for the people living right there.
And then, you know, how can we learn from that, and how were we able to combat that? And I think those would be, you know, and those would be great feedback we would love to get, because if there's parts of this that we want to make smart decisions here, we really do, with the limited information and timeline that we have. So we've tried to do this to help make those decisions. And so if there's things that we're showing that definitely are like a no-go, like that's not a good idea, let's get those out right now. And we'll make sure we don't order those pieces of furniture, or we don't put them in those combinations, or we go a completely different route. You know, we have a, you know, a ticking clock here that we're really just trying to get through here. So.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
You're welcome. Vice Chair Fisher.
Thank you. A very informative presentation. I noted that when the parklets were built by, I presume, the owners of Jones Coffee and La Monarca Bakery and Arrow Restaurant and Shiro Restaurant, it appeared that they hired a local carpenter who, with 2x4s and plywood, made a compatible parklet area. The problem is they're not uniform. They were cleverly built, but they're kind of utilitarian looking and they're ad hoc. One thing that I was impressed by in looking at the what they have in Glendora Village was the uniform look they have. A simple, I think you indicated it was a prefabricated uniform design. It looked simple, it looked inviting. It had the exposed wood, and I think the key thing we need is uniformity of the parklet design all the way from Meridian to Fair Oaks Avenue. So yeah, I think a uniform look is important for our expenditure of funds while we're waiting, you know, before December 31st. The other thing I wanted to mention is, in the process of having a level surface between the raised curb and the parklet, they put plywood with 2x4s or 2x6s under them. In the process of doing that, they've blocked the drainage. And we're going to have a big storm tonight and tomorrow where that 2-foot gutter needs to be clear. And Glendora Village did a good job of that by having the metal plate that extends from the raised curb to the platform of the parklets in Glendora Village. And I would urge that we do something like that. We've had little rain, you know, in the last year and a half. So I guess what the carpenters did has not been too much of a problem, but we need to do it right. And we need to have a uniform look.
Yeah, and I think the prefabricated systems definitely, the flooring that they used in Glendora Village, you know, had the leveling feet as part of the system. But again, you know, when we deal with like rooftop construction, water and drainage is probably the preeminent issue that you have to deal with when you're raising the floor, raising the level to meet door levels and things. So yeah, so you know, in these situations, these feet don't block the watersheds, and so water goes through the decking down to the surface, or in this case, the gutter and the road and the gutter, and then drains away. And same thing with the precast pavers. These have little spacers on them that you can't see until I zoom in probably, but it keeps gaps. It keeps a consistent gap in the paving of the pavers. So I think it's a less than 1/4 inch for ADA. But it does keep a gap so that water that does hit the surface of these goes right down through to the substrate systems and drains away. So I think any of these two systems, either the prefabricated flooring or these sort of more rooftop approach, would be an upgrade to the 2x4, you know, sitting on the roadway surface. Would certainly be, and then would be level as well, which would be important. A lot of these parklets that you see, they follow the profile of the road, in which case you're sitting on like a 2 or 3% slope while you're dining, and it's not super comfortable. So I think a flat surface is definitely a preferred situation or condition.
Are you saying these devices don't block the gutter?
No, they sit right on the, they're heavy enough and they're wide enough. They sit right on the subsurface, And so the water goes right between them, these little black pedestals that you're seeing here. And so, and then because they're like little screw jacks, they can, they have little settings on them. So if you know that you have a 2 or 3% slope, you just click it into place, and then the bottom tilts where the top stays straight. And so it accommodates slope, it accommodates all those things while keeping the surface level. And then all this space below you're seeing here is all open, completely open for water and drainage. So water can go through the gaps in the boards here. Water can go through the surface water can go through the gaps in the pavers. And again, it's consistent. We can provide more information on this system. Busan Pedestals is one of the suppliers that readily available in the local market, which is another driver of these parklet creations, is keeping things fairly procurable, and when these are readily available for most types of construction. So
Okay, thank you for that. Ultimately, it seems to me that we've got to make a decision on what we're going to purchase by December 31st. And we have here for Mission Street an elaborate plan that is a road diet and has some other features. And I don't know that there's going to be consensus on the road diet before December 31st. It seems like it's going to be caught in controversy. So I think the simplest thing we could do is upgrade and make uniform the 4 parklets we have in front of Jones Coffee, La Monarca, Arrow, and Shiro, and give them a uniform appearance and have some uniformity and consistency along Mission Street. I don't know that we can get into all these other features because no decision has been made regarding the road diet.
right, these systems are pretty flexible and they can be used in multiple conditions, but that is another route, is to focus these the creation of the parklets around the existing outdoor dining, restaurants and cafes that are using them. There's several ways to create uniformity. One, and these are decision-making points that we'll have to get through, but one would be to create a strong guideline that then the parklets have, all the businesses that want to apply to have a parklet in front of their business would have to follow, when we could control how far the consistency goes or what they can or can't change. But so that there's a guideline approach, but then there's also maybe some combination of the city delivering the K rails and managing the perimeter of the parklets so that they're all consistent with the businesses then allowed to do stuff that they need to on the inside. So there's several different routes to get there on that front, but that is an interesting other route that we hadn't been focused on, was the outdoor dining parklet in the near term.
Either of these systems work for the outdoor dining parklet. It's just, the table and chair outdoor dining parklet. It's just not purchasing the furniture that we talked about.
Yeah.
Although I would say that a business like Jones Coffee, could certainly use some of this furniture. It might be interesting for them to kind of allow people to sit and engage, in different ways that are appropriate for a single person, being there, multiple people, or like in that picture that we had up earlier when they're having, somebody's playing the piano and there's a whole bunch of people gathering around kind of for a little mini event.
Yeah, and I think it's like a little dial. So if we dial down the furniture, the imported furniture, then we could dial up more parklet floors and more parklet protections, or more urban greening, or more this sort of toolkit that we have can be applied in different ways, and that the cost scenarios that we prepared are just one of several ways. And so it's really about where the goals and where the priorities are. And that's what we just need to decide on as a team.
Commissioner Liu, do you have anything?
Yeah, thank you. This is all very informative. I just had one question. I didn't see a cost estimate for the people parker example, or the prefab. Is there one for that, the Australian product?
We reached out. We have not gotten any comments back from them yet. The Vestra did send us today some information, but we'll keep everyone updated as we get costs back for that.
Okay, and one additional question on the cost estimate for the custom parklet. It says in the custom parklet without a canopy that you're assuming $80 per square foot for a parklet, but then you're basing it on a a bid that's higher per unit based on experience. Can you explain why the reduction in estimate?
Sure. It's based on bids that were received by the Playhouse Village, which I'm sure you, Commissioner Liu, are very familiar with. The Playhouse Village parklet design was designed by Milan Avenue, and it has some similar elements to things that we would think about. So the level surface, wood cladded K-rail as the protective barrier. And then it also has some vertical elements which are tilted at interesting angles to create some kind of visual interest, but I'm sure also require a craftsman that is a little bit more skilled. And so those vertical elements make it probably more expensive than it would be to build a parklet without a canopy. At the same time, the vertical elements don't actually create a whole structure in shade. There's no shade that comes from those. They're only used to dangle lights from. So we sort of said, well, that's probably in the middle between what a parklet without a canopy and a parklet with a canopy.
The other the caveat to the custom approach would be that there is a chance that we could go out to a contractor and get a bid for some of these early details that we've started here. And we can refine this and put some notes on it, some dimensions, and get a contractor's bid on this, and then use that as a potential ordering mechanism. So like a provisional sum or something that they would not go over to be able to build out a vision for these parklets, and then use that to order all the elements. And so that might be that's a tool that I think I understand some people on the team have used before. So it might be something else to keep in mind.
Okay, thank you. That's very helpful.
Okay, I just had a couple of questions. One Commissioner Liu just asked, and that was about people parkers. What interested me about that proposal is that, if I have it right, that does away with the need for the K-rail. And I think that's an exciting option, given not only the unsightliness of the K-rail, but also the amount of space that K-rails take up, which can't be used for other more productive purposes. Do you have a sense, Investor, if I'm pronouncing it right, that's the furniture parklet product that is in Glendora, right?
Correct.
Okay, which, yeah, and at least a couple of us have seen it and we're very impressed by it. But what's interesting about that installation is there are no K-rails in Glendora for those parklets. They have very simple bollards at the edges of the parklets that are used as protection. So I'm just curious, and I think you said you were involved in that. So why is it the K-rails are necessary for the city of South Pasadena if we were to have a Vestor installation, but Glendora does not? Is that just a decision that the city made?
I can jump in there. Sure. The answer is yes, we added those K-rails. And the reason why I was going to wait for them to finish their presentation, but I was going to sort of give you a sort of a closure statement about all the different options and
Okay.
why we did what we did. But Lance and Phil, feel free to jump in on that answer if you'd like to elaborate a little bit more.
I mean, it's down to the reviewing city, I think, and then the liability. But I think it's important to keep in mind, as we have a longer design process, there's all kinds of other creative ways that we could blend K-rails and pots, and in some ways that might be more, we could build cladding around the K-rails. We're just, we're operating on a very, a focused and short way to figure out what to demonstrate without having gone through that process. And so, we would need to work with the transportation team and the engineers to figure out what that exact criteria is and what the liabilities are. And so I think and Wes will have to be able to speak to this a little bit more on the team, but the speeds are very different on Glendora Village versus Mission Street and that's another important factor to keep in mind. I think it's a different design speed. It's also one lane, right, each way. Yes. No central exchange lane. So it's very different. It's a different condition. And they've gone that route with bollards. So, but again, a longer design process will let us get to the heart of those questions and let the architecture, urban designers work with the engineers to figure out the right aesthetic safety blends that we could do here. But we need that process and that time really to do that. So.
Sure, no, I understand. And you've done an amazing amount in a very short period. So
Yeah.
I know we all appreciate it. In terms of timing, I think you mentioned that for the Vester product, it was about a 4-month or so wait. Do you have a sense of what, I know custom, it really depends on what custom ends up being, but do you have a sense like from people parkers of what we might be looking at it? I know you don't have a budget yet, but do you have a sense of timing?
Unfortunately, we don't. They have not been as responsive as, we haven't given them a whole lot of time, but they have not been extremely responsive. So we're not sure at this point, given the supply chain issues that there are, if it is, a for sure option.
Sure.
And, we can certainly reach out to Vester this week and speak to somebody. Actually, we've been exchanging messages, but this just to find out more about what that is. And, they also give you the worst case scenario too on these timelines. And so let us dig into that a little bit more and provide some more information regarding what we find out about the supply chain and the lead times and all that stuff. So that would be worth a call.
Okay, thank you for that. And last question is, staff is asking us for, at the end of the day, we're being asked for recommendations on materials to order, right? That can be ordered, invoiced by the end of the year. Given some of the comments, including Commissioner Vice Chair Fisher's, are there certain elements or products that you think afford us more flexibility than others in terms of what types of things we should be thinking about ordering now?
Larry, I can jump in really quickly just to give more clarity on the Vestra order. So we recently, or just last week, ordered additional furniture for the city of Glendora, and they have some availability of actual parklets in stock in the United States, and those are about a month turnaround, but then you can't select the color of your choice. You got to pick whatever they have here. Otherwise, if you're ordering direct, a personalized order, the current lead time they said is 14 to 16 weeks. So once that order is placed, we're looking about 4 months conservatively.
Okay, thanks, Wes. Any of you have any thoughts on my question?
Yeah, with regard to the flexibility question, I would say that people parkers is a much less flexible system. Vestra is a quite flexible system, and then of course the custom, is, that's sort of doing your own design for the specific locations in which this could be implemented.
Okay, thanks. That's all I had for the moment. Commissioner Hughes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a quick question to kind of dovetail off what Commissioner Fisher discussed. If we were to look at let's say, I think it's 6 current food parklets that we currently have on Mission. Am I correct? 6?
I think it's 4.
Because we've got all the one from Arrow, Griffin, all that block. We have Mike and Ann's.
Right.
We have Jones Coffee, Shiro. So whatever the number is. So let's say we've got, and you can correct me, please. Let's say we have 6 existing, and you were proposing what, another 4, 2 on each side of new parklets. Is that correct?
Yeah, I mean, what's represented in the plans that you're seeing here are like kind of obvious spaces that are resulting. But these can be taken, these can be, the system is very flexible, so they can be turned off and on as we need to. And so
Right.
our vision for this is having this condition happening as much as we can on both sides, all the way down with
Right.
connective elements kind of bringing through it all. So again, it'll be partly, outreach to find out what groups want them, and Wes has already done, and our team has already done some of that. And there's very strong responses. And I think the blue is representative of some of that. But again, the flexible system, so we could turn off and on as we need to.
So let's say you've got 6 existing and 4 additional that you're going to create to play off what Commissioner Fisher's concerns are about uniformity. What if we said, and it would be approach of either 2 ways. The flooring would be the same for all 6. And then you have to figure out what is your structure around it next to the K-rail or no K-rail. And if it's the prefabricated parklets that Chair Abelson talked about, and we put those in, then we don't need, or do we need the containers on the edges for safety? Because what I'm getting at is if we come up with a consistency that we have the flooring and we have structure and we have the protection we need, whether it's K-rail or the container, the flower, landscape containers, barriers, what have you. But then we focus on that, and to Commissioner Fisher's point, we don't worry about the center. We don't do the road diet, but we concentrate on these experience locations so that we have this look of conformity. We have this look of consistency and synergy for the street, but we haven't yet taken it to a diversion of the traffic flow, nor have we lost the current parking, except where you're going to add the new 4 experience parklets.
Yeah, I think the answer is, yeah, the more uniformity to the body of these that we could get, I think that would really help the look and the feel. I think it's more of an issue of how do you do that in like 2 weeks. So, because you have to design all these out and then identify all the parts and pieces and elements to place those orders in time. So it's an issue, it's really working against the clock. That was something that we would want to do over the life of this project for sure, to create that guideline and that architectural styling, for these that would be the same. And then just determining what we would allow the businesses to do themselves, whether they churn the fabric of these canopies their own color, or everything has to be the same and they're allowed to hang a sign. We have to go through that and figure that out. So, but yeah, that would be the ideal condition, is that we would have all these edges kind of matching in the flooring and maybe the structures themselves, and then the furniture could do whatever it needed to do.
Because if you concentrated just on that and you're not worried about all of the striping, temporary, et cetera, for the whole, with this whole street itself, meaning the median in the center and where you're going to do planters and all of that, that would free up some of your financing.
Yeah,
I will say though that the majority of the funding is for the parklets.
Yeah, we had a line item for 20,000 for the striping and all that. That's a provisional sum because it's not an exact measurement yet. But that's what we understand, from other projects of a similar scale, what that's cost for all the lane tape and the sort of temporary measures to paint out these ideas. And so, in some ways, pound per pound, that's a pretty good use of the money to create all these new spaces along the corridor. So again, it's this sort of moving targets of where's the money best spent. And that's what we've really been working on the last couple of weeks here, to figure out where is the best application of these ideas.
Thank you.
Thank you. And very, very gracious thanks to our consultant team here. What you saw tonight was a lot of work, very much a lot of work. So thanks to the team, especially for their expediting. Many of them were working overnights and weekends and exchanging emails in the middle of the night to get this done. And it was all in the interest of prioritizing this for the city. So a very much involved group and very passionate about what they do. So we appreciate that very much. So what we are looking from you tonight is a set of recommendations for us to take to council on Wednesday. And the decisions that have been made are not decisions that we're set on. For example, with the K-rail, that was to demonstrate certainly that can be done using the example from Glendora and adding a protective barrier like that, if that's in your recommendation. Certainly it's it's a very conservative way to go. But the second option there, the people Parker, is also somewhat of a protective barrier, but not necessarily a K-rail. So there's a range of things to consider here. The protective barrier systems, the types of seating. We talked about, people being able to lay down there. And so that's part of your decision-making process. Styling and aesthetics, certainly. The continuity of the sidewalk. And then as far the program use, one of our ideas here was to focus on a non-business use if we were only to be able to supply so many parkets in such an area. However, your direction may be to focus on that business use and to prioritize businesses that already have parklets versus areas that may not. So there's a lot of things to consider here. We certainly very much appreciate your input, and we've tried to narrow it down to some level of consideration for you tonight to have these basically bullet list of elements to consider. But we're looking for some recommendations on how to move forward so that we can receive direction from council on how to finalize our action here. Thank you.
Thank you, Ted. And I want to echo Ted's comments. Thank you to the entire Alta team for all the time, energy, and effort you devoted to this. It was a very impressive presentation, and we really appreciate it. I think we should open this up for public comments. Liana, do we have any commenters? All right, Ms. Knuckles. Sure.
Hi.
Good evening.
Hi. Now you can see me. Okay, I'm sorry I didn't read anything ahead of time, but it was a really good presentation. You covered a lot of ground in a couple of hours here, but a couple of thoughts. Starting at the beginning, I think you should extend Oak Street all the way from Meridian to Garfield. It's 3 more blocks, instead of stopping at Fremont. It's 3 more blocks. There's a lot of student activity, west of Fremont, and 2 intersections that you have to deal with, as well as Meridian being at the angle needs a little help also. And I think it sort of would complete the street, because then it's the whole street in South Pasadena. And as I said, we've got a lot of activity because the high school and Holy Family in the neighborhood, and it would make it safer, and you'd be trying out some things to be more permanent as part of it was part of the Ramona Avenue neighborhood traffic study, but that was sort of an incomplete study, and this would be helping things move along now that we have the stop sign, which is wildly successful, and everybody feels a lot safer. Number 2, about Mission Street. Mission Street is a National Register Historic District. And I think the designs for what you were looking at for the parklets, et cetera, was more modern. And I suggest that you look at something that's more traditional that would fit in better with the historic architecture, or in that direction. The town is full of architects and designers, et cetera, that could help you out in the short time that you have as far as finding a direction for something maybe more appropriate than what you showed, so that it blends in better and it's not, it doesn't stand out as being not quite fitting in the area on Mission Street. And let's see. And I think, and please stay away from the K-rails. Do whatever else you can, because those are just, and I realize the engineers, that's their preferred thing to use, but they really are ugly, even if you're going to enclose them. And I've looked at, other places, Claremont, et cetera, Glendora, and there are other things to use besides those. And if this is the opportunity to get rid of those, I think we need to take it and move on to something else. And that concludes my comments.
All right. Thank you very much.
Mark Gallatin,
Good evening, Chair and Commission. My name is Mark Gallatin, and I am the Vice Chair of the Cultural Heritage Commission and also President of the South Pasadena Preservation Foundation. I first want to start off by saying how much I appreciate the work that your commission does on behalf of the city and how much I appreciate the work that has gone into the presentation that we just saw from the team. And my comments tonight really, Ms. Knuckles sort of stole my thunder because I'm just going to be a bit repetitive here. My comment, the main comment I wanted to make is that, yes, a significant portion of Mission Street, essentially from the west side of Fairview to just west of Meridian, is part of a National Register Historic District, as is Meridian Avenue itself between Mission and El Centro. And so in keeping with what Joanne said, I think it's imperative that as you look, I understand these are demonstration designs that we saw tonight, but as you look for more permanent design solutions in street furniture and parklet amenities and so on, that you really keep in mind the fact that a significant portion of the street is a National Register Historic District, and that you would choose designs that would enhance and be compatible with that designation rather than those that would clash or not or be incompatible with it. So essentially that's what I wanted to say. Oh, and I also want to give a shout out to Phil Burns. He's a former intern of mine at the city of San Gabriel. Good to see you, Phil. And I thank you for your time.
Great. Thank you so much. Very helpful. Appreciate it. Leon, anyone else? That's it for public comment. Okay. All right. Well, thank you, Ms. Knuckles and Mr. Gallatin.
Chair Abelson, if I may just maybe add one item to respond to some of the part of the comment, if that's appropriate for the right now.
Sure.
Okay. Given that we weren't able to have a long process in which we could visit other types of commissions, we were aware of the fact that the Cultural Heritage Commission would have an interest in some of these elements. So now that we have the presentation in hand, which we finished up just before tonight's meeting, our plan was to try to distribute that, even though we wouldn't be able to get any sort of formal commission process, at least allow that community to somewhat participate in this meeting and also our council meeting on Wednesday. In addition, we were planning on making a public comment at the Planning Commission tomorrow night, if possible, just also to emphasize that some of those elements that might affect design-specific decisions would be available for people to comment on.
Thanks, Ted. I'll just go through the formality of closing public comments. We have no one else. Okay, is there anything else, staff? Is there anything else, Ted, you want to share with us, go over with us before we start
I think that's it.
going through? Okay. So is it fair to say that what you're looking for from us is direction on, you listed it earlier, but I mean, how nitty gritty do you need from us in terms of elements and so forth? Or is it just big picture? Do we like the parklet concept? Do we like the number of parklets? That type of thing? Or are we going to start talking about Vestor versus people parkers versus custom versus?
So I'd say whatever you can give us, we'd appreciate it. You know, if you want to narrow it down to like what you would prefer, certainly the decision we made on Wednesday and your advice, however broad or specific, will be considered in how we frame that to the council, and we will certainly relay those comments to the council as far as public input, including the MTech Commission or MTech.
Okay. And I would just make, before we open it up, one comment on the furniture. So what is this? This is the 13th. We're, you know, on the precipice of the 14th of December, and this all has to be ordered and invoiced by the 31st.
That's our understanding.
Okay.
Yes.
So less than 18 days. Factor in a holiday and some other, you know, conflicts, there's not a lot of time. So I just wanted to address quickly the comments of Ms. Knuckles and Mr. Gallatin about the furniture. I totally agree with them that ultimately, if they're whatever permanent installation occurs, that it should be one that's in keeping with and consistent with this historic designation look and feel. But I want to also be cognizant of the fact that we're under very tight time crunch here and pressure. And I think it was what Mr. Gallatin was getting to anyway, that maybe it makes sense if we're supportive of this concept to recommend using one of these items that's been proposed, and then see how that goes. And if these are successful, then ultimately, Ted, as you suggested at the top of the meeting hours ago, that with other grant sources and such, maybe we can do it in a more permanent, consistent, in keeping with way. So I just wanted to make that mention on the furniture. Then one other, just flipping on the residential piece, which I think is the much easier piece of this. The materials that are required for that, right? The flexible posts, the lane tape, things like that. Is that something that we should be factoring into this sort of $300,000 budget amount? Because it was in your staff report, you focused mostly on the Mission Street elements. So I'm just trying to get a sense of timing, because obviously the Mission Street piece is a bigger conversation, requires more outreach and analysis and so forth in terms of what's ultimately put in place. Whereas the residential slow street piece, I think, is a much more straightforward item. So I'm just trying to get a sense of timing and whether we need to be talking about the residential piece in terms of materials, or that's you're dealing with that a different way.
So as it would be easier to deal with the residential piece, that's why we're trying to peel that off, because that's probably easier for us to deal with later. Those types of numbers and that type of a material, we could much more easily try to procure through an operating budget per se, versus buying program equipment, which is a little more difficult for us to do operation wise. It's a much more expensive ticket item and requires like specific direction about what to buy. We can always acquire some of those tape materials separately. And to that effect, we really don't know what that's going to look like. And we really don't want to rush the residential design element until we get the proper feedback from the community. And so that's why we've sort of pushed off that purchase of those materials. It's not out of the conversation. Certainly when we know exactly how much money we have, we could buy generic tape sets for what we expect we might need. But here we're trying to focus on the mission components, like you saw here, like parklet type components. And the reason why we're focusing on parklets is we've considered other things we could spend this money on. Has to be, it can't be permanent infrastructure per the grant, has to be temporary intent program equipment type stuff. For example, I will say that we looked at if we could implement bollards with this money. Though we may be able to purchase some sort of temporary hybrid bollard type of situation with it. The risk for us from a city staff perspective was too high to make that type of purchase, because we really don't know there's a lot of unknowns in how that equipment would be installed. And so we didn't think it was a wise, fast purchase. So we've looked at other types of things that we might be able to spend the money on. And certainly the ad hoc committee gave us the COVID ad hoc committee gave us some other input on types of devices that you could utilize in the streets, like armadillo type of bumps and things like that. But as those aren't presently shown in our conceptual design, it would be a little bit of a stretch for us to purchase those to utilize in where we haven't identified those. And certainly other things have been suggested, such as like RFBs and things like that, which would be a great way to utilize that money, because there's a need for those in the city, but that we have a feeling that those wouldn't necessarily be covered by the grant because they're not necessarily temporary installation. So we thought about a lot of things here that we didn't talk about too much tonight in the interest of time. But to answer your question, it was our recommendation that we focus on more of the parklet program equipment, planter type stuff along the mission implementation.
Okay, so I'm gonna, thank you, because that answers my question. I want to advocate for having a line item for the residential components. The concern I have is we're talking about a project it's temporary and 3-month in nature. And I'm very concerned about, to me, the residential slow streets piece is straightforward, doesn't need a lot of additional meetings, and can be implemented with the comments that we've made. They can go make them, and we can get that done. And I'd rather have the money. This grant is supposed to be for that, so at least part of it, right? So I don't want to use all this money for parklets and then have zero money for the residential components, and then have to start dealing with that later, because the residential piece is a critical piece of this. So from my perspective, whatever the pot of money is, 300,000, right? I'd like a number from you as to what you think is, but even if it's 20 grand or 30 grand, I mean, whatever it is that you think will address what Alta is proposing for the residential streets, and, you know, adding in a buffer for some additional adjustments, so that is preserved. Because we just need to be careful that we get things done, and we say, okay, residential, it's blank dollars covers it, whatever that is, and then the balance of it we can talk about for, which is going to be the vast majority, for mission. I mean, that's what I'd like to see. I just don't want to spend a bunch of money on Mission Street stuff when we don't have a lot of certainty, and then the residential stuff never gets done. That's what I'm worried about.
Thank you for the
That make
comment.
sense?
Yes,
Yeah.
so what we could do is we could take a recommendation where in the time remaining, we would do a quick estimate of, utilizing the conceptual designs, what's the quick estimate of what that residential, what those components would cost, and then utilize that as the recommendation that we utilize that for that expenditure. Like you said, even if the end design is slightly different, we would have made some, could be like 80% match to what we would have implemented. So yeah, we could make, if that's part of the commission's recommendation, we could take that action.
Okay. And that's just myself. I just I wanted
No,
to
I
make
would-
sure we
I
didn't
would
lose track of that.
Chime in and say, I think that's the important thing, because we were talking slow streets, and these are the streets that people complain about a lot regarding speeding. And this is where, the cars could jump the curb. This is where children could get hit. We've talked about, even if they've looked at the crosswalks, that they're close to schools, so that the safety issue becomes really critical, whereas we don't have as much issue with speeding on Mission, even though it's obviously an important street from the economic standpoint of the city and a draw and a center, but we're more than just the one street. So I would concur that making sure that we're allocating and focusing on those other streets for the safety of our community, I think, is important.
That's helpful direction.
Thank you. Thank you, Commissioner Hughes. Vice Chair Fisher.
Yes, I'd like to just make a comment regarding the use of K-rail. It would be nice if we can find an alternative, an attractive alternative to that. When I was in Glendora Village, I noted they didn't use K-rail on their structure. On the other hand, there was 10 feet between the traveled way of vehicles and the parklet. So maybe that was a factor. I think here on Mission Street, we're only a couple feet away. So, but if there's an alternative, that would be great. Regarding the concern that so many of the existing parklets are in the historic district, I think we have to be sensitive to that. I think on the other hand, we don't have time for some custom design. And I think if we were to purchase a uniform prefabricated parklet, there would be the opportunity at a future date to add elements onto that, whether it be cladding or putting a hanging fern
up above or whatever it would take to make it look more historic. I think that's possible if you get a prefabricated uniform parklet structure. But I too agree that we need to make an affirmative commitment to the residential portion. I think for most of the streets, there should not be a lot of controversy. So I think you'll ultimately be implementing something close to what the team presented to us. With regard to Grand Avenue, that may be a little riskier because I have no problem with the proposal, but I think when the street was slurry sealed a number of years back, there was a proposal to put a bike lane, and the residents felt negative about that, but maybe they feel differently now. So I think that's a little bit of a risk to purchase all the detour grade pavement marking temporary tape for that. On the other hand, you can use it for something else in the future. So I think we need to make a commitment to the residential slow streets program. With regard to what to do on Mission Street, I again think that because of the controversy regarding the road diet is not played out, no uniform decision has been made. We have 18 days to decide what we're going to do. I suggest we spruce up the existing parklets and make them uniform with a prefabricated design. And I guess if our commission was to concur with that, we'd have to then, I guess, select what particular option we like, but that's the direction I would like to see.
Thank you, Vice Chair Fisher. I'm going to get to Commissioner Liu. What is your understanding with regard to the parklets existing and proposed additional? Is it, so there are 6 existing? I just want to I want to make sure we have consensus on what's there now.
I believe there's 6, correct?
And,
There's 6 that exist right now for dining parklets that are currently on Mission.
and they're proposing how many more? Those are the 2
more.
questions.
4 more.
Okay.
Sam or Ashley, can you help us with that question if you might know what you've observed in your evaluation? I know it would give you a couple moments to take a look. I know we're trying to jump.
So it's if I can have it right, is the light blue is the existing and the dark blue is the new? Is that?
Yes, so it's approximately 6, but you have to remember a bunch of them are linked together along that essentially the entirety of the block between Meridian and Diamond. So we're talking about a stretch that almost looks like there could be up to about 4 there, when in reality they're functioning as like only 2 people truly utilizing them in terms of businesses, but their space that they eat up is approximately 4 to almost 5. It's hard to really tell, but it's the entirety of that block there. Plus you have the pocket in front of Jones Coffee. You have Shiro. And I was just talking to Wes to try to confirm about the one in front of Mike and Ann's. I thought it was still there, but Wes was saying that it might have been removed recently. So that one, there's some conflicting idea about if that one's still active or not. But beyond that one, there are those ones that are currently existing, the majority of them being on the south side, with the one being on the north side for sure in front of Jones Coffee. The other ones, I don't believe there's other parklets existing currently. Shiro, yeah.
If I might add to that, when we talked about a cost estimate of showing 4 parklets, for example, the Vestra, 4 parklets with their associated furniture, pots, etc. We're talking about, they're about 4 parklets that are of a certain size. So about where they will take up 2 parking spaces, and they'll be 30 feet long, including the pots on each side. So if we're talking about the whole block, Meridian to Diamond, that's certainly going to be worth several of those.
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you. So the estimate we have doesn't contemplate outfitting all proposed 10 anyway.
Yeah,
But
and
differently,
that's
right?
that's
Correct.
part of our discussion in terms of like a demonstration purchase.
Right, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. That's helpful. Commissioner Hughes?
To that point, would it be, could you, I want to say split the difference? Because is the concern right now also with the spaces that we have there for the block Meridian to Diamond about the flooring and the surfacing there and the concerns about the gutters and ADA and everything else? Would it make sense to give them and help them with flooring as part of nothing else, let's say, but the flooring aspect of it, and then look at your demo separately for potential demo parklets elsewhere? The same thing with Shiro and Jones as far as the flooring issue. Or do you not perceive there's a concern right now with the consistency and the drainage and everything else with those spaces?
Is that more of a question? I feel like that, is that a question more for us as a consulting team or for staff?
Yeah,
dealing
I
with
mean,
our drainage.
from a construction standpoint, I thought there was an issue where we're concerned about the existing flooring, especially if we go into rainy of these properties of what we have established there right now.
Perhaps we're talking about a quantity discussion about, like, instead of building full out systems, about sufficient flooring utilizing these
Right,
funds
if we
for.
split the difference and say, okay, let's take the properties Jones and the block between Meridian and Diamond, and those properties we look at just improving the flooring. Keep the K-roll, keep everything else, look at the flooring so that, to the point that Commissioner Fisher talked about, that we have drainage, we have the elevation the same, we've got safety there for ADA, our wiring issues, we fix those. Same thing with Jones, same things with Shiro. And then you add 2 or 3 of your new demo parklets with prefab, which most of those were on the block after Mike and Ann's, correct? So in that next block, across from LaCar and over in that area. One was envisioned there, I believe. If you had another 1 or 2. And those become your prefab existing. And I guess part of the question would also be, if you're looking at prefab, you showed us some light. Are there different color choices, like a darker color range of the woods, which might seem more historic for it fitting in with our architecture, as opposed to the light woods that we've mostly seen?
Yeah, in terms of I guess are we muted? Okay. Yeah, I guess in terms of the aesthetics of some of the prefabs have a pretty wide range of wood and paint colors. So we could certainly do that. I mean, I guess just decision-making wise, perhaps the most difficult decision will be the clear path on, safety related to the prefab systems. If we don't want to use K-rails, then, investigating and getting to the bottom of what might be suitable seems like the biggest decision-making point for those prefab systems at this
But
point.
we didn't say, but I thought the concept right now is that we can't really change much of the existing businesses because of the nature of how this has been estimated. So you're talking K-rails for only the new demo parklets, or no K-rails? I'm not understanding.
We have several options. We have a version that utilizes the K-rails and then some that don't. But it's just we haven't been through that. We haven't been through the process to determine with the engineering team what we can use. We're pretty certain that a K-rail system will be safe enough and that it would be suitable and everyone would be happy with that in terms of safety. But yeah, so we have both options, and we could improve the existing ones with these prefab systems as well if we wanted to.
Commissioner Hughes, if I may, I think maybe to clarify what you're asking is, would we maximize our use of the funds if we were to not implement a full setup for the parklets demonstrated here today, but instead purchase more flooring and leave other existing elements in place, and then maximize the use of new flooring at all existing sites?
as one element, and then how much money is left to do additional demo parklets. So you've got that consistency kind of look, is what you're saying, so that when you go down the street, it all looks, it has a synergy. If we can't do everything, how can we make it so at least there's elements that tie it all together?
But let me add on to that. I think if we talk about the demonstration parklets, that assumes we've implemented the road diet. They're designed for the road diet. We haven't made that decision yet. So
But couldn't we had the spaces where we originally had Mike and Ann. If we took out some of the parking over by the next block over, on the other side, next to the automotive, over on that area where we don't have anything now, which is I thought what you were indicating. There
Yeah,
was
just to clarify.
Parking spots, and we don't have to do a road diet. We're just taking the parking spots to create similar to what we have on the south side, like Shira.
but that's not demonstrated here. What they demonstrate with the dark blue assumes the configuration with the road diet.
Right, that's why I'm saying if without the road diet, we sort of then create these demos that are just similar to what we do with what we've done with in front of Arrow, but it's on the north side of the street per se, or the south, in that those 2 blocks or so where we have nothing.
Okay, so they would be at the same locations they show, but of a different dimension.
Correct.
Okay,
More in line of taking out the space that we currently kind of done with like Shira
okay.
or Arrow or Jones Coffee.
But that presumes then that we have some cost savings by doing only the flooring at the existing things. The concern I have about that is that these come as a uniform prefabricated unit and not where you can just do this, but not the railing that comes with it. So if that would then get into customization and, what do you put as the railing if you don't use the prefabricated kit
Right.
that they provide?
Let me go to Commissioner Liu, if that's okay, because he's been patiently waiting.
Oh, I was going to ask, I can't really tell on the Vestra, combo A and basic parklet, if they have different depths, and if they're all roughly the same depth as like a parking space, does it make sense for us then to kind of cover our existing parklets with just kind of maximizing the basic parklet floor and edges purchase on the sheet? Because it shows that one unit is 18 grand. Whereas once we start getting into the combos with it looks like the planters and other additions, it doubles in cost almost. And because if these are all roughly the same depth as our existing parklets, then we can just hold on to these, figure out the road diet later. And it's just like we've all been saying, just, kind of rehabilitate or figure out how to make our current ones uniform and not like the mishmash it is right now. That's, might get moldy tomorrow, but hopefully not.
Oh, go ahead.
No, yeah. So that's it. I think we're all talking towards the same thing, and I fully support it. I think we maximize the kind of the really basic package. That kind of gives us most flexibility down the road, and also helps us with our current parklets that could use some help. And would also maximize the quantity that we get, since it definitely sounds like some of these parklets shown, whether they get decided to get built or not, would require 4 or 5 units connected in a row, like the one from La Monarca to Arrow.
Mhm.
So that's my stance on this.
Okay. So no, that's helpful. And out of these comments is a question, maybe it's been answered, and it's to our Alta team. So, because Vice Chair Fisher made a good comment, we haven't made a recommendation as to whether we're supportive of, when you say road diet, translated, removing one of the travel lanes in each direction, right? So, because we haven't seen, I know, I think Commissioner Liu and Commissioner Dunlap saw the study or draft study, initial study, whatever it is.
Yes, we just, over our ad hoc committee, we shared that, but the key findings of the study we include in the staff report, which were about the removal of let me pull that up here for you. The key findings were the closure of Meridian Avenue between Mission Street and El Centro Street would result in an increased delay along Fremont Street while reducing volume along Meridian Avenue. That was the first key finding. The second key finding was the queuing and stacking resulting from a lack of turning pocket storage and linear capacity of the through lanes on Mission Street causes significant spillback into adjacent intersections, which limit the ability of intersections to process vehicles.
Okay, so because to cut to the quick, because it's 10 of 10, I just want to, the first bullet is of no moment to our conversation tonight, right? Because we're not, nothing that was presented has anything to do with closing Meridian between Mission and El Centro. Is that a fair statement?
Yes, and I'll also add that, among all the things we have to do tonight, we didn't bring the traffic study because again, it would be an iterative process, which this commission would participate in. Yes.
So,
Just to add, I don't, can't recall the year, but we did do this a number of years ago. We took part of Mission and took a lane out
oh no, I'm just talking about,
for a period of time.
Yeah.
And it was not well received and it did not last long. And we went back to what we have currently.
it was definitely before my time, but I don't remember living through that. And something sounds like I would have probably remembered it.
Yes.
So I just want to cut through this stuff. So the first bullet point with regard to closure of Meridian between Mission and El Centro, nothing to do with what we have to decide tonight, correct?
Correct.
That's a much bigger decision or recommendation at some point in the future, but that's not part of any of these plans. Yes, okay. The second point, which is more relevant, the road diet removal of a through lane. It seems like the lack of turning pocket storage is remedied by not landscaping the entirety of the center median and allowing more turn pocket, longer turn pockets, maybe. I don't know what linear capacity of the through lanes means. But I guess it's a long way of saying I'm generally in favor of trying, because what we're talking about again at the end of the day is trying out something, right? So we're trying out removing one travel lane in each direction. I'm fully happy to support trying it out. But the question I have is, do we need to make that decision in terms of ordering parklets? In other words, is the size, the dimensions, the depths, the whatever it is we want to order by the end of the year, is that dependent upon our deciding we're okay with a road diet or not on Mission? Or it doesn't matter? Well, my thought is these demonstrator parklets would be new ones. That was what I had in my mind. I don't know if that's the intention. We could do it with the existing ones. I don't know. I don't know what they're thinking. Are these demonstrators, these budgets for brand new ones that they proposed, or demolishing and rebuilding the existing ones?
So it's a tough question to answer because we're looking for a balanced approach here. We're looking for a purchase as flexible as possible,
Right.
not knowing what we're going to do.
Right. So, and maybe this is an alter question. Do we have to decide about road diet in order to place an order, or no? The way these things are designed, or the way they're modular and the way they can be put together, they can accommodate whether we remove a travel lane or not, is really the question.
We
Well-
believe,
Will it fit within just the parking, in essence, the sidewalk and
Right.
a parking space that would be in front of the property?
Right.
We believe so, because what you've seen here on the conceptual design is different types of parklet sizes. There's the parallel parking size, which is the width of a car, and then there's the 45-degree sizes. We've talked about the 60-degree possibility. So we think that it's flexible enough, because we're not buying the entire set for the entire street, to buy several, and they would be able to work into some future design.
Yeah, you know, for the angled parking spaces, then, you know, what you're seeing on the screen right here, you would just add another row of these floorings to create that. So the angled parking spaces are 18 feet deep. This is about 7.5. So you would just add, so yeah, the answer is yes. The system is very flexible to parallel parking and to angled parking systems. So it will work with both, but, and we don't have to know exactly where they're going right now. We just need to know that we would want to order a certain amount of them related to other elements and other moving pieces. And that's the decisions that we would have to make now.
So these are modular where you could make them 8 feet wide or 15 feet wide or 20 feet wide?
The prefabricated systems are modular. Yeah, so you could stack on them. You can make them we could add more than 3 in a row, and we can make them even longer if we wanted to. So the prefabricated systems are modular, and then the custom approach for the flooring, we could accommodate any shape or size that we wanted at all. So there's 2 approaches there for the flooring, if we're talking about the flooring.
What you see on the screen right there, the prefabricated Vestra system plus a K-rail on the outside of it is about 8.5 feet wide. So it is a parking space, you know, very, very slightly
More
larger than a normal parking space.
But we think that it can work, you know, flexibly within the existing parallel spaces if it need be, or expand it out to angle parking if the road diet is taken into account.
And if it's expanded out, are those additional materials that we have to think that we would have to be ordering by the end of the year to make that happen?
Well, so like think about it this way. So if we do the prefabricated systems, say you could have, you know, 2 parklets at 6 modules, right? You know, like 2 3s, or you could have 1 larger one at 6, right? So it's really an issue of modularization, right? So how many modules can we afford, or do we want to buy? And then we can figure out where they apply. And we can make some suggestions on that, but, you know, we're at the stage of deciding if that is the right approach right now. And then we can decide on how many and where they go.
Okay.
Quick question. Were you still, you're envisioning 4, correct? So if we kept our existing businesses the way the restaurant businesses are, but you were envisioning 4, but 4 right now in consideration that we would not lose a lane, and the 4 would fit within the footprint of a parking space, angled or parallel.
Correct.
Is that what you're envisioning?
And the 4, we were agnostic as to whether they are actually in totally new locations or if they are upgrades of the existing
Location.
And that scenario was also balancing in pots and things. And so it was just one possible scenario, but yeah, it was balanced. And our focus has really been mostly on balance and flexibility
Well,
because the decisions
that
were.
point that you just made about flexibility and balance, having worked with other locales, have you found a value in, I want to call it the mix? Meaning, like if I'm looking at this demonstration parklet with Vestra floor and edges, it's got a very open, as you have the bicycle there and seating, and versus the Parker, which is more structured and a little more formal. Is there a benefit to having that mixture, or is there an advantage for us to kind of have more of the same so that we can get the orders in and we have consistency or the same look? Is there a thought there?
From a programming standpoint, yeah, the Parker's people, one was very closed, whereas this system that we're looking at now, the Vestra is more open. We can make the open one more closed, but we can't make the closed one more open. So I think the Vestra is a little more flexible with how we would arrange elements within it. And it's my pretty strong opinion that creating different parklets, you know, to accommodate different businesses and different people is your best shot at again, providing a vibrant streetscape. Because, you know, I mean, we're out there on site and we just saw people taking their sandwiches to the park. And like one guy was sitting on the bench on the corner, just wanted to be outside, right? So people need places to go, not just for outdoor dining. And I think that's the best, given the information that we have currently, this seems to be the best, most flexible system that we could build off of. So the ones that we've shown.
Mr. Chair, I had a question for Ted. If this commission were to recommend that you purchase the vestry models to fit within the shadows of the existing parklets, whether there's 4 or 6, however we count it, the existing parklets. And if we were to recommend that you purchase the materials necessary to implement the Slow Streets program on Oak, Grand, and Hermosa, would you have money left over to possibly purchase additional parklets to be used at some designated location at some future point in time?
It's a difficult question to answer because even the money, how much money there is itself is a little bit of a moving target because we still have several more weeks of work to do with this team. And this team is drawing on that money that we're talking about tonight. So what we look for you for is some recommended direction as to, if that's the case, what do you envision seeing us do? Like as a base recommendation to purchase parklets for those existing locations. Well, let me rephrase. Prioritize the purchase of the materials for the residential section, number 1. Then prioritize the purchase of the parklet equipment for the existing parklets, number 2. And then if there were leftover money, how would that be prioritized? Is that a fair thing to say?
I think you answered my question, and the hour is getting late. So, Mr. Chairman, I'm going to make a motion that probably is flawed and maybe revised after further discussion, but I think we need to move. I move that we recommend that staff proceed with purchasing materials necessary to implement the Slow Streets program on Oak Street, Grand Avenue, and Hermosa Street. And further, that they purchase vestry or vestor parklets necessary to replace the current parklets that exist on Mission Street. And if there is any additional money left over, that staff purchase additional parklets as the money may allow for deployment at a location to be determined.
So I like that, most of that, and I just wanted to point a clarification or maybe a friendly amendment, or may not be friendly. I'd like to make sure that we have the flexibility to implement these parklets or have the width of the parklets sufficient in the event that there's support for the road diet. Because if we're just buying equipment for the existing locations, the existing shadow, then we're not enabling ourselves an opportunity to try out the road diet. So is there a way to massage your very eloquent, well-stated motion to accommodate that concern, do you think?
I view that as a very valid comment, and I guess I would amend my motion to request that staff purchase additional modular elements that would allow for the expansion of the parklets should the road diet be approved at some future point in time.
If I could adjunct to that, my only question or thought would be to be able to see how these experience opportunities might play out on Mission. Whether we do say, let's pick one location to be an experience location parklet. So cover our bases with existing, but give ourselves one demo for that, as they keep saying, the person wants to go out and eat, but they don't want to be in a restaurant, or it's got some sort of just seating and interesting experience element to it. See how the public engages with that.
Good point. The motion would allow for the purchase of additional parklets or parklet as the budget allows to be deployed at a location to be determined if the money allows.
Right, but I think on mission though.
On
not
on
somewhere
on
else.
mission.
Yes,
on
on
mission.
mission.
Yes.
And it's probably the longest motion in history, but
Could I ever repeat it?
And just to comment, as Commissioner Liu clarified for me a minute ago, that the estimated costs sheet for the Vestor items contemplates both basic and various combos, which include various interesting accessories, furniture, whatever. So that's sort of built in and contemplated, I think, in what's been proposed. And I think, as Commissioner Fisher mentioned, what's part of his motion already. So it's a long way of saying I second the motion. Any further comments, questions, thoughts, or should we go to a?
May I clarify the motion?
Only thing to
Oh.
say is, could we also have them explore with Vestry if there's a color palette that sort of fits into the historic look? If they're when they look at the Vestry, what's available, and I know you had issues about what's local and what they have to bring in, Scandinavian, etc. But if there is a palette that seems to work with more of a historic nature, meaning that I think more of the darker woods potentially than the very pale, blonde woods.
Is there a path to a quick resource that we could use as a team to get to that? I mean, in terms of like, dark, what are the architectural criteria, dark woods or,
Lance, what we can do is we can follow up with the other, we'll find a way through that with the other commission teams, maybe in the next couple days.
Yeah, I might
That's right.
suggest that
Yeah.
I think you already said it. Sorry, we don't have to vote yet. We're going to get there. Vice Chair Fisher. The CHC, you could probably run it by the CHC, Coastal
Yeah.
Heritage Commission Chair, for a quick, here's the color palette. Do you have any input?
We've already started that conversation. That's our next stop
Right.
after this
And let's
meeting.
just remember, this is temporary and we need to order this stuff by the end of the year.
Right.
Right.
I
Okay.
do just want to clarify one
Okay.
thing on your motion. Your recommendation, since we're talking about the existing structure and hopefully replacing those existing structures, we've offered you a design with the K-rail and the Vestor. Is there a recommendation with regard to the existing K-rail in a new implementation of these new materials at that location without the road diet and without adjusting the streets at this time?
Are you asking us to make a decision on the K-rail?
Yeah, a recommendation as to how about the K-rail or not, but it's one element that was not covered in the motion.
I'm just I'm not going to speak for the other commissioners, but I'm uncomfortable making that recommendation. I would think you, as signing off on the plans, would want to be sure that it's sufficiently crash worthy.
That's
And-
fair. I just wanted to make sure it wasn't
Yeah, I-
forgotten in the late hour here.
I'm afraid to make a decision on that, even though I hope there's an alternative to the K-rail, but I'm not sure there is.
And to that, you might need, obviously, the city attorney. And
Of
our
course, so we all have to
our
go through
insurance
those, yep.
Carriers to weigh in on that because of the nature of our street, all those factors.
Certainly in the decision-making process, yes, and tonight would just be a recommendation.
I have something to say, but okay. So I would just echo what my fellow commissioners have said, but I hopefully you have heard that there is a strong concern about continuing to use the K-rails. So if as Vice Chair Fisher said, and I think I urged multiple times already, if there are other acceptable alternatives, it would be terrific if we could avail ourselves of those. And let's just keep in mind, it doesn't have to be for all of them. Demonstrator, right? Maybe there's one location where maybe you're more comfortable than the others of trying something and be a little less intense. But I think we all agree at the end of the day, I think it's a staff decision. Yeah.
Understood. Thank you.
With our learned input and advice or something like that. All right. How about if we vote on the motion? You want to call it, or I'll call it. All right. I think it was I.
Okay.
All right, so a motion by Commissioner Fisher with some friendly amendments, seconded by Commissioner Abelson. All those in favor?
Aye.
All right. Any opposed? Any abstaining? All right, so we have 4-0 in favor of Vice Chair Fisher's motion. Okay. Thank you all. This was an amazing amount of work and in such a short period of time, and you guys have come up with some awesome ideas, and I'm really excited to get some things going. You know, we get so bogged down in studying and analysis, sometimes we lose sight of what we're really here to do. So I look forward to getting things ordered and seeing some things out on the street next year. It's not nodding or anything. Okay, anything else we should cover on Slow Streets, or?
I think that's it.
Okay, well, thank you very much to Sam and everyone at Alta. You guys are amazing. We really appreciate your sticking with us on this.
Yes, thank you so much.
Great work.
Great
Thank you.
presentation. Thank you all.
Thank you very much.
Have a good night. Okay. So I think the next section we'll probably go through pretty quickly. Agenda item 3 on our list here is the SR 710 Mobility Improvement Projects Ad Hoc Committee. That would be Vice Chair Fisher and myself. I don't have anything specific to report, neither does Vice Chair Fisher. Ted, anything you want to share with us?
Just
at the
two
moment?
quick comments in the interest of time. The Fair Oaks project, the signal segregation continues. However, we are going to pause for the next couple of weeks in the interest of the community interest of not having that construction going on Mission during these next couple of weeks during the holidays, and then resume that work in January.
How is it? Sorry, I've sort of maybe cleverly avoided Fair Oaks recently. How has it been? Has it?
Well, the work right now isn't on Fair Oaks because there's already an existing conduit down to Fair Oaks. We think it's been relatively easy to string the
Okay.
signal. It's the Mission part that is requiring trenching and digging and
Oh, so no lane closures on Fair Oaks.
not at the
Oh,
moment,
terrific.
no.
Great.
The second on the 710 mobility will come back at a later item in opening up a discussion about the work happening in Pasadena regarding the 710 stub. So that's something we're looking into right now, given what's happening in Pasadena, and we'll bring that forward at a future meeting.
Okay, great. Great, thank you. Next item, Ramona Avenue Neighborhood Traffic Management Ad Hoc Committee. I know we made our recommendation some time ago. Anything?
Unfortunately, we don't have any
developments?
updates for you tonight on that.
Okay. COVID-19 Ad Hoc Committee. Well, I think we just spent most of the meeting dealing.
I think we did, yes. Yeah.
Anything else that you want to?
No, city staff, Ted and Tatovic have been great at managing this, and thank you for your time. It's an incredible amount of work in a very short amount of time. So thank you. That was it.
Okay, that's great. Great report. Following up with item 6, Preferential Parking Policy Ad Hoc Committee. Anything?
I have nothing to report.
Okay, staff? No? Okay.
And Ted, you had mentioned that that's going to be brought up with planning, correct?
Yeah, that was my only comment, was that the idea is that's part of our new strategic plan to be a joint effort between Public Works and Community Development for a citywide parking plan.
Great. All right, thank you. So that's the end of our agenda. Typically, we have commissioner comments, council liaison comments, and staff comments or updates. So the council liaison comments is moot. Commissioner comments, I'm going to forego it unless there's something very urgent that somebody wants to bring up.
I had one question. Ted, how are they doing with West Coast Arborists for the city entrance?
Yes.
Is that coming soon?
It is coming soon. We're waiting on an inspection date with Caltrans to commit to a date so that we can schedule that work. But we already have the West Coast on board. So as soon as that date comes, we'll reprioritize West Coast Arborists that day to halt their trimming and go work on that sign.
Do you have to do it in 2 phases? Because there's the trees, I'm going to say that are the Caltrans trees, which are on the side, but then the landscape where we have our stonework, isn't that ours?
I believe we can do it all at the same time, but I can check on that for you.
Yeah, just to that point really quick, they're basically, in terms of trees, they're two rows of trees. The trees against the freeway. And then there are also trees right underneath where the sign is. There's a walkway underneath the sign, and there are trees that border that walkway that are also crazy high that block the visibility. And then the sign itself, there's a bunch of brush.
Right.
So I just want to make sure when they go that that they're comprehensive. Okay. Does staff have any additional comments, updates to share with us?
No,
No.
I think we covered those to the committee. Well, I will mention that we do have a couple other work going on. We were engaging with Pasadena with regard to the Pasadena, Columbia and Fremont intersection, and also the Columbia and Orange Grove intersection. So there'll be more to come in a future meeting about those.
Great. Right. Very happy to hear that.
One quick thing, which you're probably aware of, the State Water Resources Board just allocated zero allocation to the State Water Project, which affects MWD, which affects Upper District. So potentially more water restrictions might be coming down the pike from Sacramento, from the governor. So we just need to be aware of that. And water conservation and our environmental liaison obviously is doing a good job of getting the word out, but it's really important that people conserve water right now. And hopefully they'll turn off their sprinklers because rain's coming.
Yeah. And just to that point, and then we'll adjourn. I just recently had to purchase new smart sprinkler controllers. They happen to be Orbit, but there are a lot of different models and brands. What's very interesting about them is, one, they're incredibly smart, and they're app based, and they link to GPS and weather and all that, so they'll automatically shut off if rain's coming and that kind of thing. They're wicked smart. The other thing that's very important is that you can get refunded or rebate for the up to, I think it's $180 per controller.
Metropolitan Water District,
Yeah.
water rights.
So yes, so that's at the end. I think you pay the tax and that's it. So it's a great way to be conscious and conserve water. So great thoughts. Okay, on that note, I will call this meeting adjourned. Thank you all very much.
Thank you, Ted.
Have a good evening.
Thank you.
Happy.